Good evening, students. Am I audible? You can reply in the chats. So let's begin our today's session. My name is Ankit, and I am a faculty here for economy, and also I take current affairs analysis of Indian Express on our English YouTube channel, that is StudyIQ IAS English. Now, this I expect is your first class for SIP, that is Success in Prelims. This is an initiative by StudyIQ IAS where we provide you with the adequate revision classes for all the important subjects if you were to approach this year's prelims examination. Now, am I audible to the new joinees here? Everyone, please register your presence. Now, in the purpose or our purpose of taking SIP classes is to revise all the important aspects, both static as well as current portion of the syllabus for all the subjects. And in the economy session that I will be taking, I will be covering 11 important articles, which will be spread through 11 important lectures over the next 11 days. Now, the intention of SIP classes is first of all to revise each and every important aspect of the syllabus, so that before you appear in prelims, you have gone through all the relevant and important articles, news analysis, concepts, etc. Also, after the session ends, what you're expected to do, that this session will continue from 6 to roughly till 9 p.m. in the night. Now, every day after this session ends, what you do is have dinner and go to sleep and wake up early next morning, revise the syllabus or revise what had happened in the lecture last evening, and go through entire PPT and the book that has been provided to you by StudyIQ. After revising everything, what you do is attempt the test that is released by StudyIQ for the following lecture. And the purpose of this session will be only fulfilled after you successfully attempt the test. Because only after attempting the test, you will realize that this topic I need to study again. This topic I need to refer to the lecture video again so that I gain the adequate understanding of the particular topic. And please make sure to note down each and every topic that you mark incorrectly in those tests. Understood? So, by understanding or marking those tests properly and understanding what you've gotten right and understanding what you've gotten wrong is where your success depends. So, this is how you will repeat each and every portion of the syllabus for not just economy but for other subjects also after the session ends. Right? So, this will be your entire practice for the next days when you'll be attending the lectures for SIP. Now, our first lecture today deals with the basic concepts for economy and another important part of the syllabus, that is national income accounting. So, without delay, let us start our today's discussion by understanding some of the very basic concepts of economy. Now, first, you have to understand there are various types of economy. First economy is known as centrally planned economy, otherwise also known as socialist economy. Now, in socialist economy, what to produce, how to produce, and how to market or distribute, all of these decisions are made by which authority? By the government of that country or government of that economy. So, this is how you call a centrally planned economy. Now, examples of centrally planned economy was erstwhile Soviet Russia, also known as USSR, socialist republics like North Korea, China before the timeline of Deng Xiaoping, and also countries like Cuba. Now, here the governments, they have limited resources. So what they do is they want to get maximum out of those limited resources. And there's also a chance that these countries may have presence of large number of poor population. So in case if you make everything private, only the rich people will able to get the resources, and that will be denied to poor people. Understood? So this is how poor people, if they are not to be denied access to resources, or they are not to be denied the fruits of economy, countries they follow centrally planned economy, that each and every decision, first of all, it is planned, that what kind of population will get what kind of goods, and then accordingly the production and distribution of these goods happen. So these are the examples of centrally planned economy. On the other extreme end are called as market economy. You may have heard this term in form of capitalist country. And in these countries, every decision of what to produce, and how to market, it is not made by government. Rather, it is made by private individuals as well as private companies. So on one extreme, you heard the socialist economies or centrally planned economies, where the government itself was the participant in the market and it made all the decisions necessary, what to produce, how to produce, and who to distribute it to. On the other extreme, there is called as capitalist or market economy, that the decisions which in centrally planned economy were made by the government, the capitalist or private parties, they make these decisions. Now, Adarsh, sir, do we have to make notes simultaneously? Please pay close attention to what am I saying in the session. I will make these slides available to you after the class ends. So you need not make notes right now. Just understand what am I explaining in the classes. And this is applicable for all my lectures. Please do not try to make notes. You already have a SIP plus booklet for every subject. And also, we will be providing you with these slides so that you can revise it after the class ends. I hope I've addressed your doubt, Adarsh. Yes. So let us move to understanding market economy. I told you, right? Every decision of how to produce, what to produce, how to market them, that is made by the market forces or by the private sector. So, for example, in a centrally planned economy like Russia, people want bread or people want potatoes. So, what kind of farmers will grow wheat so as to manufacture bread? Or what kind of farmers or how many farmers will grow potato? That decision is not made by farmers, but that will be told to them by the government of that particular socialist economy, right? But in market economy, for example, countries like US, so if the farmers were to grow barley or corn, so who will decide that? Farmers will themselves decide it because they understand the demand for barley or corn is more in US. So if they grow corn and barley, they will sell it to market and hence make a healthy profit. So in market economy, the private sector themselves, individuals like farmers, companies themselves, they decide what to make, and how to market it. And even the prices of the product that they are selling in the market, in market economy, they are depending upon the factors of demand and supply. We'll try to understand what is demand and supply in our frequent and subsequent discussions later in this very lecture. Whereas even in central planned economy, what prices the farmers will sell potatoes for, or what prices the producers will sell bread for in the market, that is also fixed by the government in the centrally planned economy. So you understand the two extremes. On one hand, there is socialist economy, that is 100% decisions are made by government themselves. And on the other extreme, there is capitalist economy or the market economy, where every decision or 100% of decisions are made by private individuals and companies. So there must be something in between, right? Where some decisions are made by the government and rest all the decisions are made by private economy, and that is what is mixed economy. And theoretically, no country in the world right now is purely a centrally planned economy, and no country in the world right now are purely a market economy, because these two economies are just ideal or a perfect scenario. But in realistic cases, what we have seen, that many countries, they are mixed economy. and the participation of government and private sector, they vary depending upon the country. So for example, you may have heard the country which foresees or lectures other countries for adopting capitalist economy, that is US. It is mostly a capitalist economy, but presence of government sector still remains in the countries like US. So US must be located somewhere here, that it is primarily a capitalist economy, that major decisions are made by the private sector, but minor or some of the decisions in US is still made by the government sector. So US lies here. Whereas countries like Russia right now, or even China for that matter, they are primarily socialist economy, but sometimes these countries, they involve private sector. For example, you may have heard various famous Chinese companies like BYD, which manufactures car, or Alibaba, which is a e-commerce giant in China. All of these are private companies. So that is why China is located somewhere towards the socialist side. It is not 100% socialist, but it has a major presence of government in all the sectors of economy. So we understood that there are two extremes, but in ideal cases, all of the economies in the world are mixed economy. But the presence of government with relation to private, it varies. So in countries like US, there is a major presence of private sector. So these are majorly capitalist countries, although not completely capitalist. Whereas countries like China, they have majority decisions made by the government. So these are majorly socialist, if not entirely socialist. Whereas countries like India, they remain somewhere here, that is in between. Because since the time India got independent, India was a centrally planned economy, but still India had presence of private sector. However, after 1991, when economic reforms took place, we understand India started the process of privatization. That is, earlier, the sectors which were reserved for public sector, that is, even bread was manufactured by government. Now these were to be started by private sector. That earlier government used to manufacture cars, ambassador cars, but now all the cars made in India, these are made by private companies. So did bread. That earlier modern breads, which was a government owned company, they've started or they've stopped their production, and now bread is manufactured completely in India by private companies like Britannia, Harvest Gold, etc., etc. Understood? So that is why no country in the world is entirely socialist, or no country in the world is entirely capitalist, but all the countries in the world, including India, China, Russia, US, etc., all of them are mixed economies, but the presence of government in sectors of these countries, they vary. So that is why I told you China is majorly a socialist country, whereas US is majorly a capitalist country, but all of them are mixed economy that has presence of both public sector, that is government, and private sector, that is private companies and individuals. Understood? Now let us see if we can solve this practice question or not. In centrally planned economy, all important decisions regarding production, exchange and consumption of goods and services are made by the government. Yes, this statement is correct. As I have told you, centrally planned economies, they have entire presence of government in all the domains, that is what to produce, how to exchange and how to consume. These decisions are made by the government. Whereas in second statement, in a market system, all goods and services come with a price which is agreed upon by the government. Now, what did I tell you about centrally planned economies? That not just production and marketing of goods, but even the prices at which these goods are sold in the market, these are decided by the government. Whereas in market system or capitalist economies, the prices or even what to produce, how to produce, these are depending upon market sources. That what is the demand of the product, what is the supply of this product, that decides what the prices of the product will be. For suppose you're manufacturing a bed which costs 20 rupees, but all your competitors are selling the bread at 15 rupees. So nobody will purchase your bread, rather they will go for bread which is available at 5 rupees cheaper. So that is why the company which is selling a bread at 20, and if it is not sold in the market, they will have no other option but to reduce the prices of the bread to 15 rupees. And this is what the market forces do. So the decisions on what the price of that product will be in market system is decided by market forces and not the government. So second statement here is incorrect. First is right. We have to identify correct answer. Therefore, option A here is the right answer. Now I will be taking up many practice questions throughout the session, and my intention of these practice questions is not to put you or give you UPSC related questions or UPSC level questions, but these questions essentially will help you consolidate your learning in this session itself. However, you can try and test your knowledge as per as UPSC level questions after this session ends and the test by StudyIQ will be released to you. Right? Now another question. Mixed economy means an economy where both agriculture and industry are equally promoted by the state? No. There is a coexistence of public along with the private sector? Yes. There is an importance of small scale industries along with heavy industry? Not necessarily. Mixed economy means you can have anything. An economy is controlled by military as well as civilian rulers, also incorrect. So the correct option here is B. I told you the basic feature of mixed economy is that both public sector, that is government, and private sector, that is individual, private companies, etc., both are present in the economy. Now let us understand sectors of economy. How are economy classified as per different sectors? Now the first sector, it is called as a primary sector. Why primary sector? Because this sector forms the basis of all other products that are subsequently manufactured in any economy. And primary sector, it is basically defined as a sector which directly uses natural resources to undertake production of any activity. For example, farming activity. How does farming happen? You sow the seeds into the land, and it is actually the land and its fertility and the soil that results into the cultivation of the crop, right? So humans, they are not doing any science or they are not doing any magic. Rather, it is just the soil and its fertility and its characteristics that leads to cultivation of any crop. So primarily, you are using natural resources like land here. That is why cultivation of any crop or even cotton, wheat, etc., these are examples of primary sector or primary sector of economy. Further, animals, how do they give milk? You are not adding anything to animals, or you are not giving any medicine to animal, rather using their own natural processes. The animals provide you with dairy or milk products. They provide you with meat. They provide you with other dungs, etc., which you can use as fertilizers. And all of this products by animals, these are outlet of natural biological processes that happens inside the animal. So theoretically, even dairy activities, production of milk, these are also examples of primary sector. Now also, earth has presence of many minerals. So if we mine those minerals, these minerals are not manufactured by humans. Rather, these minerals happen to exist in the earth after processes of earth related processes that happens over 1,000 of years. Understood? So even mining of minerals and their ores, these are all examples of primary sector. And why is it called as primary sector? Because materials which are manufactured or which are cultivated in the primary sector, these are used as a basis of each and everything. So for example, if you were to manufacture bread, you'd naturally need wheat. And which sector produces wheat? Primary sector. You need to make cheese, but you need milk for that. Which sector gives you milk? Primary sector. You need to manufacture steel, but for that you need iron ore. Which sector gives you iron ore? Mining sector. So are the examples of primary sector. Now all of this data is given in the very basic NCRTs, but you will be surprised to know that question in last year's prelims appeared on what kind of activities constitutes primary sector, secondary sector, tertiary sector. That is why understanding even these basic concepts are very essential if you were to approach prelims, because you cannot afford to lose out even the basic informations like these. Understood? Now let us understand secondary sector. Now, sector which covers activities or which buys or takes away natural products which are cultivated or obtained out of primary sector and changes its form by a process or human involved process, these are termed as secondary sector. I told you, right, manufacturing of bread, it requires wheat, and which sector provides you wheat? It is primary sector. But you have to undertake physical production process so that as to use wheat and manufacture bread out of it. Similarly, if you have to manufacture cheese, you have to get milk from the primary sector. So primary sector, it is providing raw material, and you are using that raw material and changing that raw material into any other form, that is known, or that activities are part of secondary sector. And why it is called secondary? Because it is a next step after primary sector. So for example, if you manufacture cotton based clothes like the shirt I am wearing right now, it has been manufactured out of cotton which you have used from primary sector, and then you make cloth out of it. So manufacturing of cloth, manufacturing of bread, manufacturing of cheese, all of these are examples of production processes. Hence, these are part of secondary activities. Whereas obtaining any item out of the natural processes like cultivating wheat from land, obtaining milk from animals, which uses biological process, or mining of ores and minerals from the earth, these are examples of primary sector. But when you change the iron ore which you have obtained from primary sector and make iron sheets or steel sheets out of it, that are examples of production process, and hence these are part of secondary sector. Now the third sector in this line of thought is called as tertiary sector. Now the primary intention of tertiary sector is to help or support the activities that goes in primary and secondary sector. So for example, to undertake activities of manufacturing of bread, you need to transport this wheat from farmers to factories that manufacture bread, right? So for that, you need transportation services. Also, you need to store large amount of wheat in factories so that the production happens throughout the day, as breads are in high demand. So you need storage for your wheat also. And all of these are examples of support items that the sectors give to primary as well as secondary sector. So these services, that is transportation services, storage services, these are examples of which sector? Tertiary sector. As they themselves, they do not produce any good, but they are an active support to the production process or even the cultivation process. So that is why transport, storage, these are examples of the tertiary sector. But to undertake production process, you need capital or you need loan from banks, and that loan will be provided you by financial institution like banks. They are also supporting your production related activities. So banking is a part of tertiary sector. And what if you need to call the farmer who has not delivered you the required wheat? You need phone services, you need internet services so as to video call him to see whether or not he has actually the possession of wheat or not. So even communication services that actually help in the production process, these are examples of tertiary sector. But rather than just supporting these production activities, there are many sectors that also constitute service sector. For example, architects, if they are helping design your building, they are also offering you service. So do doctors, that if you fell sick, you need doctors to give you medicine so that you can get better. And also teachers who teach you on how to become a good citizen, how to get skilled, how to get jobs in the market. All of these are examples of services. Therefore, even doctors and teachers, these are examples of what? Service sector. So all of this activity that helps in production process through storage, transport, banking, communication, and also activities that gives us services like professional services, architects, doctors, teachers. These are examples of tertiary sector. Understood? Now, let us solve this practice question. Which of the following is primary activity? Is processing a primary activity? No, you change the value of goods here. Is fabrication a process of primary activity? No. If you make out of iron ore you make iron sheets. These are not example. Manufacturing is not example. It is all tertiary, it is all secondary activities. Whereas mining, as I told you, uses mining of ores and minerals from earth. It is an example of primary activity, because here earth is responsible for making any item a mineral or an ore, and that is why when you're mining it, you're just harnessing the natural process of earth. Therefore, mining is the primary activity. And now, which of the following is not part of the service sector in India? Is transport a part of service sector? Yes. Is hotel and restaurants a part of service sector? Yes. Actually, as a tourist, when you go and visit anywhere else, suppose in Himalayan states like Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, you will be staying in a hotel that are providing you with residential services, and you will be eating in a restaurant that is providing you with food with the help of service. So these are examples of service sector. Insurance, also service sector. What is construction? Construction is actually you're using earth elements like sand, and you're making a building out of it. That is a part of secondary activity. So it is not a tertiary or a service sector. Therefore, B option, as it asks you to identify not a part of service sector, is the right answer. Hope you are getting me. Now, which of the following activity cannot be included in tertiary sector? Working in call center is a part of service that you offer in many companies. Tuition occupation, as teacher is teaching a particular child in their objects, like I am teaching you right now, part of service sector. Banking gives you loans, offers you deposits, part of service sector. Beekeeping, what do beekeepers do? They actually use the biological process of bees to harness or to obtain the honeys, right? So beekeeping is a part of primary sector. Now tell me, what is agricultural storage? Suppose you store grains like wheats anywhere. So is it a primary activity or is it a tertiary activity? Anyone want to answer? Adarsh, Surjit, Kumar? Rahmatullah says tertiary. Anyone else? Yes, this is a tertiary activity because you're offering a service of storage. That is, you're helping the primary sector or agricultural sector to store their produce, which is a service. Priyanka, yes, tertiary. That is why it is called as a tertiary activity, not a primary activity. Whereas cultivation of any crop, obtaining milk from animals, or using mining activities, these are examples of primary sector. But if you store these items anywhere or if you transport these items anywhere, these are examples of tertiary sector. Now let us understand. Yes, Midun, you're right, tertiary. Now let us understand what are the composition or how does Indian economy or which sectors actually dominate Indian economy. Now if you can see from this chart here, you can see that in 1973-74, the value of Indian economy was quite less, and it was dominated primarily by primary as well as tertiary sector. But as the Indian economy got developed in 2010s or the decade of 2010s, you can see in terms of contribution to economy, it is the service sector that contributes about 55 to 56% in our India's GDP, whereas the least amount of contribution was that of agricultural sector that only contributes about 16 to 17% of GDP. Now, if any economy were to get developed, it has to reduce its dependence on agricultural sector and increase its dependence on secondary as well as tertiary sector. And as India has gotten more developed, as it was less developed in 73 and it got more developed after 2010s, that is why you can see this change in the dominance of the sectors. As India primarily was an agricultural economy, now it has become a service sector led economy. But why has actually service sector or its dominance in India's economy has happened right now? Because you have to understand, first of all, India has a very large population. India's population is so much that it is currently the most populous country in the world. So that is why when you have a large amount of population, they'll be needing different kind of services. They'll be needing healthcare services, they'll be needing educational services, they will be require goods which have to be transported to them, which has to be stored in godowns. So all of this increases the demand of basic services. Also, to cater to demand of increased population, you need increased agricultural activity. Increased agricultural activity means you can use these resources and undertake higher production. That is why both primary and secondary sectors becomes more developed, and you need tertiary sector to support the activities of primary and secondary sectors. Also, there is a rise in income level, therefore demands for goods and services have increased. And as demand increases, both the demands of services increases. As you become rich, what you do? You order, you open Swiggy and Zomato app and you order food. You go and buy various products in the market. You go as a tourist, travel to different locations, both in India and outside. And what do you need for that? You need restaurants, you need hotels, etc. All of these are example of service sector. And also, India in recent times has seen rapid growth of information and communication technology. As you may be using UPI right now. So, what goes behind the UPI? You have to open a bank account, and banking is an example of what? Tertiary sector. You may be needing customer support for any item that you buy for e-commerce site. E-commerce is what? Tertiary sector. So that is why India has seen increased dominance of tertiary sector, primarily because population is high, their income levels are increasing, and that is why they need more goods and services, which needs development of both primary and secondary sector. And which sector supports primary and secondary sector? It is the tertiary sector. And also, there is rapid growth of information and communication technology. You need internet services. Companies will have to provide you with SIM card and internet connection. You will be using UPI to pay for goods and services, again, banking sector. You will be using communication technology to communicate with your friend using mobile. So, all of these are examples of service sector, right? Now, let us understand the share of GDP, or as I told you in the previous graph also, as India became developed, the reliance on agricultural sector reduced from here to here. As earlier it was about 40% of the economy, now it is just about 15 to 16% of GDP. Whereas the service sector here, it has grown quite high. As now the contribution of service sector, it is more than 55 to 56% of GDP. Whereas originally you wanted to employ more people in manufacturing sector. So manufacturing sector has increased, but it has not increased to a extent that was desired by the government. Now let us solve this another question. About 1/3 of GDP in India is contributed by agricultural sector. Is it true right now? What did I tell you about agricultural sector? It contributes about 15 to 16% of GDP, whereas 1/3 is what? About 33.3%. Is it right? The answer is no. More than 60% of our country's GDP is contributed by service sector. What did I tell you about service sector? 55 to 56% of GDP, not 60%. So, second statement also incorrect. Which of the following statement is or are correct? None of them are right. Therefore, option D is right. Surjit Yadav, no. Kumar, no. Option B is not right. GDP actually, service sector actually contributes 55 to 56%, not 60%. Now let us understand which sector employs most amount of people. Is it service sector? No. Because if you can see from this graph, this particular graph highlights the contribution of employment in India in 2017 and 18. And you can see agricultural sector contributes 44% of total employment, followed by secondary sector at 25%, whereas service sector employs 31% of people. Earlier, agricultural contributed to 71%, whereas lesser contribution were made by secondary and tertiary sector. So let us try to solve this another question. Largest proportion of working population in India depend on which sector? Answer me this correct fast. Everyone who's watching this, which sector contributes the largest proportion of working population? Rahmatullah A, Surjit Yadav A. Anyone else watching this? Yes, both of you are right. Primary sector, as I told you in this graph, still employs 44% of people, which is more than both secondary and tertiary sector. Tertiary sector employs 31%. Secondary sector, which includes production, employs 25%. Now, for purposes of classification, the service sector or tertiary sector has been further reclassified. Now, these include quaternary sector, which is also known as the knowledge sector. Now, these sector deals with knowledge or intellectual pursuits. For example, any research and development activities, business related activities, consultancy services, or even education. These are part of quaternary sector. So, as I told you, right, coachings, colleges, schools, etc., part of quaternary sector. Companies like Samsung undertaking huge research and development, part of quaternary or knowledge sector. Companies like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, which provide consultancy services to other private companies, government, etc. These are examples of what? Quaternary sector, also knowledge sector. Yes, Priyanka, you're right. Adarsh, you're right. Option A was right. Now, there's another sector called as Quinary sector. Quinary sector is an example where highest decision is made in the economy. Be it offices of CEO of any company, be it top government officials like Secretary of Government of India, even PM Modi, who is making all the decisions in the government of India, senior business executives like CEOs, CTO, CFO, CMO, etc. All of these are examples of what? Quinary sector, because these are the people who are responsible for making all the transformative and significant decisions made in the economy and the country itself. And also, these are examples of gold collar professions, right? So, this is how you classify the sectors of economy. The basic classification is primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary, to summarize, is when you use natural resources like land, animals, etc., to get products. These are examples of primary sector. And using the primary sector products, if you change its form into another kind of product, like changing wheat to bread, or changing milk to cheese, these are examples of what? Secondary sector. And to support primary and secondary sector, you need a lot of services like transportation, storage, and also you need experts or professionals like doctors, teachers, engineers. All of these are examples of what? The tertiary sector. And further, we have qualified or quantified these into quaternary and quinary sector. Quaternary includes knowledge or pursuit of research, development, etc. Whereas quinary is the sector which makes the transformative and important decisions in the economy, like top business executives, government officials like secretary, prime minister, etc. Okay. So this is how we are done with sectors of economy. Now let us understand how we devised or divide these sectors in general. Give me a minute. Now, sectors are also divided based on organized and inorganized. What is an organized sector? If any company, they are registered with the government and they are to follow its rules and regulations on what kind of labor legislation they should follow, on what kind of people they can hire, or how they can fire people, or whether or not they can fire people. All of these are rules and regulations which are passed by the government, and any company in the organized sector, they will have no other option but to follow the rules and regulations which are provided by the government, because they are registered with the government. Also, they follow formal process and procedures. For example, they have to fulfill the labor legislations. They will have to provide safe drinking water and working environment to the people who are employed in their factories. And in case women are working, they are not supposed to be engaged in night shift. They will have to be provided with transport so that they are safe even after they leave the premises of the company. They will have to be provided clean and safe drinking water during their working hours. And also, workers who are employed in these sectors, they are enjoying security of the employment, that you cannot say bet kal mat aana. You have to get or have to understand if that worker is not performing well, or if there is any other logical or legal reason, then only you can let that worker go. And you cannot just hire and fire any person you want. Also, you'll be providing them with adequate compensation directly into their bank account. You have to pay them certain kind of leaves for which they will be paid even if they take the leaves. You will have to pay even during the holidays, that you cannot say you don't come on Sunday, so I'm deducting Sunday's payment for the entire month or the entire year. Also, they'll be provided many social security benefits like pension after they retire from their jobs. And all of these are done by organized companies. So, for example, a company like Amazon, they have to register with the government. The employees working in Amazon, they'll be getting paid leave. Even during Sundays, they will have some leaves that they can take, and the salaries will not be deducted. They will be provided with water, safe transport, safe working environment, good and clean environment. They will be getting salaries directly into their bank accounts, and they cannot be fired as per the wishes of the company. Rather, they have to follow all the rules and regulations of the government. And all of these companies are called as organized companies and organized sector. Whereas on the other hand, there are companies which are known as unorganized sector, as these are small and scattered units that are outside the formal control of the government. Now, jobs in these companies are often low paid and often not regular, because, for example, a farmer requires a labor to work in his or her own farm. So he or she says that, labor, I'll be providing you with 200 rupees every day. So come to my farm whenever I have to cultivate those crops. So, for example, that labor works in the farm for 20 days, the cultivation process is over. Now the farmer decides to let go of that particular labor, and that labor is only liable to be paid for 20 days. So, these are examples of unorganized work. As you can understand, the employment in this sector, they are not secure, and also these workers, they are not eligible to be paid for overwork that they do not get paid leaves, they do not get holidays or even leave during sicknesses. And for example, there must be a woman or a domestic help working in your household who must be cleaning your dishes, cleaning your house, cooking you food. And generally these people are just paid on the basis of work they do. They do not get any kind of paid leaves, they do not get any kind of fixed working environment. So naturally you must be seeing these women, they work for longer hours during the day, which is not the case in cases of organized sector, because organized sector, you have a fixed working hour, and beyond that, if you work, you will be paid with overtime money, right? Now, large number of people who are selling on streets, like street vendors, these are unorganized workers, as they do not follow rules and regulation. Even the delivery boys working for apps like Swiggy, Zomato, these are also examples of unorganized sectors, because what they are, gig workers, they are temporarily employed by the company, and they are only liable to be paid for the work that they do on a daily basis. For example, a worker works for 4 hours, he'll be getting some money, whereas another worker who might be working for 12 hours will be getting larger amount of money, because he or she has delivered large amount of products. Understood? So this is how you divide sectors based on the rules and regulations that they follow. That formal companies who register with the government, give employees fixed benefits, cannot fire them indefinitely, have to provide them with safe working environment. These are examples of organized companies. Whereas unorganized sector are the small and scattered units like street vendors, delivery boys, etc., who are often lowly paid. They do not have a regular working hour. They are not liable to be having any social benefits, social security benefits. They do not have a paid leave. These are examples of unorganized sector. Now, dash sector is characterized by small and scattered units which are largely outside the control of the government. What is the correct answer? Reply correct fast. Sir, education don't fall under services. Rahmatullah, I told you, right? Education falls under services, even healthcare. Surjit, are bank officer coming in this sector or not? Bank officers are part of tertiary sector. Rahmatullah A, Surjit A, Adarsh A, yes, you're right. Unorganized sector is where it is outside the control of the government, defined by small and scattered units. Yes, Kumar, right, A. Now let us discuss the sectors of economy in basis of ownership of the unit. For example, private sector is where both factories, assets, etc., these are owned by private individuals and companies. And the intention of these individuals are economic intentions, that if they undertake any activity, what is the intention of these individuals? They want to make profit out of that virtue. So, for example, if you're manufacturing or you're starting a manufacturing unit and you're manufacturing a product, what is your intention? You want to make profit out of that activity, right? Or even if you're setting up of your restaurant, what is the intention of setting up of a restaurant? Is it to feed poor people? No, it is to feed people who are able to pay to that restaurant, and also according to their payment they will be provided with various food items. So these are the examples of private sector, that to get the services, goods, etc., we have to pay them money, and these individuals, they undertake economic activity primarily with a motive to earn profit. For example, Adani Enterprise, Reliance Industries, owned by Ambani. These are examples of private sector. So is Tata Steel, Tata Group of Companies, Airtel, Vodafone, Jio, etc. All of these are examples of private companies. On the other hand, if the government owns any company, it is known as public sector company. The purpose of these public sector companies not to earn profit. Rather, the purpose of these public sector companies is to undertake delivery of goods and services at reasonable price, that not just rich but even poor people can afford the items. And this is what we saw happen during the time India got independent, that most of the products made in the India, including bread, cars, scooters, etc., all of them were made by public sector. And the intention of public sector is not to earn profits, rather government earns money through taxes, and that is why using the money of taxes they set up factories, manufacture goods and items, and they sell it at reasonable price, often less than the market price. And modern day governments, they spend whole range of activities. As I've told you, services like railways, post office, which are not profitable in nature, these are under the public sector. As government is responsible for railway activities, it is offering you post offices. As undertaking or sending a courier through speed post, you will be just charged rupees 40. Whereas similarly, similar parcel, if you sell through or send through a private company, they will be asking 200 rupees for that. So why is government undertaking postal services? So as to offer the service of post at a much cheaper price. Also, railways, as you can understand, passengers, when they travel through railways, they have to spend less amount of money, and also these are quite cheaper. And because the government has so much amount of money that it is getting from taxes and all, government can actually afford to lose money in the railway sector. Whereas the private sector, if they were to operate railways, the ticket prices will be quite high. Understood? So this is how you divide the economy based on the ownership. Public ownership is government owned companies, private ownership is individual or public private sector owned companies. With reference to functions of public sector in India, which of the following statement is correct? Now, public sector provides public utility resources. Yes, it is right. I told you, water supply, post services, all of these are examples of public utility provided by government to build social and economic overhead capital. Yes, as you can understand, government has presence in healthcare, it has government hospitals, government has schools. All of these are intention to provide services at much cheaper cost, which helps build human and overhead capital. It ensures balanced regional and sectoral growth. Yes, as you can understand, in India, most of the private steel companies, they are located very close to the iron ore mines. But on the other hand, you'll see government companies like SAIL or Steel Authority of India, they even have a plant in Tamil Nadu in the district of Salem. Whereas in nearby districts of Salem, there is no presence of iron ore. Why did government set up a factory in Salem in Tamil Nadu? Because to undertake balanced regional development, because there was no steel factory in Tamil Nadu and you want to employ people in Tamil Nadu. That is why governments set up a steel factory in Tamil Nadu. To pursue egalitarian goals, what is egalitarian? That is the development of each and everybody in the society. This is what the public sector wants to do. Whereas private sector, these are only driven by need to profit. So naturally, they'll manufacture goods and services which will be sold to rich people, as they are able to pay more for such goods and services, whereas poor and unorganized people will be neglected by private sector. That is why public sector sets up and has these kind of four intentions. So all of these four are right. Option C here is the right answer. Now let us understand types of goods. First are examples of free good, which is available to all. There is no rivalry in their consumption, and there is also no limitations. That is, they will not be empty anyway. So for examples, sunshine, These are examples of what? Free goods. Also monsoon or rainwater. Is it available to all people living in that particular area where rainfall happens? Yes. Sunshine is available to every person living in a place where there is daytime. So these are examples of free good. What you have to understand, it is available to all people. There is no rivalry in consumption. For example, if I am getting sunlight, so is the person next to me not getting sunlight? The answer is no. He or she has the same amount of sunlight that I am getting. And also, if I am getting sunlight, will less sunlight be left available for other person? The answer is no. So that is why if it is available to all person, there is no rivalry in competition or no limitation on the availability of such goods. These are classified as free goods. For example, sunshine, monsoon, etc. Now there are common goods. For example, public park, ponds where you can fish. Now these are available to all the people living in area. So that is why they share this availability of all with free goods. But rather there are rivalry in consumption. So for example, if there are 10 people in the park and the park can have only 10 people, so can the 11th person enter the park until or unless those 10 people are there in the park? The answer is no. So that is why it is available only to a handful amount of people at one time. Although everyone can access it, but only few can actually access it at a particular time. Also, there is a limitation of the resources. For example, if you're fishing in a pond, so for if that pond has 100 fishes and if you take out 10 fishes out of that pond, there is only 90 fishes available for the next person to fish in. And if subsequent event happens, there will come a time that when there is a no fish available at that pond. So in cases of common goods, although these are available to all people, but there is a rivalry in the consumption and there are limitations on the amount of resources that are available. On the other hand, there are public goods. For example, police services, defense or security of India, which is undertaken by the government. Now, these kind of services, they are available to all people in India. So actually, if you're not a taxpayer, will the army person say, no, I will not defend your home? Or in case if God forbid any unforeseen events happen to you and if you go and register FIR, will the police deny you that no, you do not pay taxes, I will not file an FIR for you? The answer is no, right? So that is why these kind of public goods, police, defense, even street lights, these are examples of public good. As government sets up these public good and the benefit of these public good, they are available to all the persons. Whereas there is no rivalry in the competition, because once police is defending a particular locality, that means that even I am defended and my neighboring house is also protected by police. So that is why if police protects my house, that does not mean my neighborhood house will not be protected. Also, is there a limitation on these services? The answer is no. Because as I told you, defense services, if the army is located in the border, it is protecting the entire country, not just Jammu Kashmir, not just Punjab, not just Rajasthan, rather the entire country. So that is why these are characterized, or these are very similar to free goods, but there is a catch. Because government has limited resources with it. So for example, government spends a lot of money on defense activity, so it will have less amount of money to spend on street lights. So there is what is called as an opportunity cost. Now if you don't understand what is an opportunity cost, I will tell you in the later part of our session. So you have to understand government has limited amount of money and hence it has to select what kind of activities it has to spend money on. So for example, if it spends 100 rupees on defense, which means it cannot spend that 100 rupees on establishing streetlights in your locality. Now, what are private goods? Private goods is simply my shirt is my shirt. It does not belong to you. Similarly, the mobile phone or laptop you're watching this session on, it belongs to you, right? It does not belong to StudyIQ. It does not belong to me. So these are examples of private good. That is your personal belongingness for which you have paid for you, and it belongs just to you and your loved ones. Now, what are club goods? For example, all of you must be knowing what Netflix is, what Hotstar is, or what this course available on StudyIQ is. These are examples of club goods, because the persons who are not paying for that services, they will be excluded. So for example, your friend who has not subscribed to this SIP courses, he or she will not be getting access to this particular lecture, hence they are excluded out of it. Also, if you have subscribed to Netflix and if not subscribed to Hotstar, you will not be getting the benefits of all the content that is available on Hotstar. And these are examples of club goods that by virtue of payment or by virtue of non-payment, you can exclude any person by offering of such goods and services. These are example of club goods. Whereas consumer goods are any item that you purchase in the market, for example, clothing, shirt, or even food that you ultimately consume, that are examples of consumer good. Whereas capital good are examples like machinery, using which you undertake economic production, computers that you set up in factories, as computers they keep up with every information that is required for functioning of the companies, they keep up all the data of employees, they use it to offer services to its clients by use of internet. All of these goods which are used in the part or parcel of production process or delivery of goods and services, these are examples of capital goods. So does or are you purchasing the phone for your personal need? Is it a capital good or consumer good? Can anyone answer me? Priyanka, if you are purchasing a phone for your own private consumption, is it a capital good or a consumer good? Adarsh, Surjit, Rahmatullah, Surjit, Kumar, anyone? Consumer good, right, Rahmatullah? No, Kumar, it is not a capital good. But for example, if you're using that phone for your business related activities, yes, Adarsh, it is a consumer good because you're using that phone for your own personal use. But suppose you start a business and use that phone to contact your clients. So that phone acts as a capital good because it is helping you further the businesses. And also, if you buy computer for your own personal benefit, it is a consumer good. But if you set up a computer in your office which is used for handling your businesses, that is a capital good. Understood the difference? So suppose if you're using a mixer grinder in your own kitchen to prepare food for your family member, it is a consumer good. But if you're using that mixer grinder in a hotel or a restaurant where it uses to grind items which you will eventually sell to the customers, that are an example of capital good. Understood the difference? Now, I told you, right, opportunity cost in the last slide. That is in cases of public good that government has limited amount of money and it has to decide what kind of activity it has to spend that money on. So, for example, government is spending 100 rupees on street light. So, similar that 100 rupees cannot be spent on defense or police related activities. That 100 rupees cannot be used to construct road, right? So, government has to actually decide whether or how to use that money. That is the concept, is what potential or opportunity cost is. That by undertaking expenditure in one item, government has to decide that it is letting go of another item. So the potential benefit that the government, businesses, or any individual, if they were to miss out on choosing one with the other, that is called as an opportunity cost. On the other hand, tragedy of commons is that actually people misuse the common resources. You must have seen public parks, right? It does not belong to any particular individual. So what people do is that they consume items, they eat Lay's chips, and they throw up the wrapper there itself. And also people nearby ponds, what they do is they throw the cold drink water bottle into the pond. So when you misuse any common resources just because of the fact that you do not own that you particular resources, it is known as tragedy of commons. And on the other hand, are goods and services available at a uniform cost to each and every person in the country? The answer is no. For example, Microsoft, it offers many other products like MS Office and also Windows, which is a computer operating system. But you will find out that these subscription of MS Office and MS Windows, these are available at a cheaper cost to students. Because you understand, right, students, they do not have much amount of money, so you're offering those products to them at a much cheaper price. So this is actually a legal discrimination. So when any company, public or private, discriminates in setting up a price of their products, that is called as an example of price discrimination, right? Now there is another concept called as utility. And this utility is actually the satisfaction that you get out of consuming any item. For example, if you're very hungry and if you want to eat pizza, anyone who doesn't like pizza here? I hope everyone likes it, because I've never seen anyone who hates pizza. So, for today's example, let us consider we are all eating pizza and we are very hungry. So, the first bite or the first slice of pizza that we eat will get the maximum satisfaction out of it, right? But after we have had one slice, so the second slice we eat will get lesser satisfaction as compared to the first slice, because before eating first slice we were very hungry, but now that we've eaten one slice of pizza we'll be lesser hungry. So our satisfaction, it reduces after we eat subsequent slices of pizza. So the marginal utility, it decides on the additional satisfaction from consuming one more unit. So for example, on the scale of 1 to 5, 5 is being maximum, you get 5 amount of satisfaction in eating the first slice of pizza. And when you eat second slice of pizza, you'll be getting lesser satisfaction. So suppose you're getting 4 satisfaction. So this is how the additional satisfaction that you're getting from consuming additional amount of pizza, it is reducing by the time. And this is what is marginal utilities. And also, as you consume more units, the marginal utility, it forms ultimately after you're full by eating fifth slice of pizza, you will not be getting 80 satisfaction. So suppose your capacity is to eat just 5 slices of pizza and you're full after 5 slices. So what if I force you to eat the 6th slice? You'll be feeling very bad, right? Because you are overeaten now. And that is why the satisfaction has not increased after eating 6 slice, rather it has reduced. So as you understand, as you get full, you'll be consuming less amount of food and you'll be getting less amount of satisfaction. This is what diminishing marginal utilities. And the total utility is actually sum of all the utilities that you consume from the unit. And there will be a point after which you get the maximum satisfaction, and ultimately this satisfaction increase reduces, and after a period of time it becomes negative. This is called as diminishing marginal utility. Understood? Now markets in general, they are classified on the basis of competition. For example, if many companies are present in a market and they are selling n number of items in the market, that is called as a perfect competition. For example, what if you were to buy a jeans in the market? You may have many companies that produce jeans: Levi's, Mufti, Lee Cooper, and another companies also, Big Bazaar or Fashion at Big Bazaar, West Side, etc. All of these produce and sell you jeans, right? So buying jeans or the market of jeans is actually a perfect competition, because you have many options available and many kind of jeans available at a different price. For example, if you want to spend 500 rupees, you'll be getting jeans, and even if you're rich and you're spending 5,000 rupees, you still be getting a good quality jeans in the market. So this is an example of how market has perfect competition. That is, many companies are manufacturing it and there are many sellers in the market who has an option to buy jeans for any cost or any value that is available in the market. Now what if the competition is not perfect, rather what if it is imperfect? So let us understand in what cases are actually competition imperfect. For example, what if there's a monopoly? What is monopoly? If there is only one seller in the market whereas there are many buyers. Whereas in perfect competition, there are many sellers and there are many buyers. Now let us understand monopoly. I told you, right, in this case, there is only one seller and many buyer. For example, railways. What if you want to travel by railways? Do you have any another option as compared to Indian Railway? The answer is no. So monopoly is actually the area where only one seller is present, that in case of railway, only Indian Railway operates the trains in India. But what if you are going in airways? You have many options. You have Air India, you have Indigo, you have SpiceJet, you have Akasa, etc. So there are many other players available in the market, whereas in cases of monopoly, only one seller is selling you the service of transportation. In case of railway, that is, it is an example of imperfect competition. Now, what are monopolistic competition? Now, monopolistic competition is actually there are many sellers in the market, but they are selling you differentiated or different products. For example, the market of luxury watch. Now, Rolex watch, it might be different from Omega watch, right? Both are examples of luxury watches, but persons who like Rolex watch may not be the case that they may go with Omega watch, right? Because all of these are different products. Both of them are watches, but the kind of watches might be different based on color, based on their features. Similarly, mobile phones, although you might have an option to buy Samsung and Apple, but these phones are very different in the way they operate, their features are, right? So this is our examples of monopolistic competition. Although there are many sellers in the market, but they are selling somewhat differentiated, if not equal kind of products. Now, what is oligopoly? There are only few sellers in the market and there are many buyers. For example, the telecom services. Who are the major players in the telecom sector? Vodafone, Airtel, Jio, and there's a marginal player, BSNL. So if you want to get a SIM card and have a fast internet connection, you only have two options, Jio and Airtel, because Vodafone is not that fast. So this is an example of oligopoly, as there are only few sellers in the market, whereas buyers are quite huge number and they only have a limited amount of option. Whereas the fourth imperfect competition, it is called as monopoly, where there are many sellers, but there are only one buyer. For example, you manufacture seats for trains or railway seats. So who will be the buyer? Indian Railway. And what if you manufacture army uniforms? Who will be the buyer? Indian Army. And you cannot sell the products which is made for Indian Army to another person. Or you cannot sell railway seats made for Indian trains specifically to a foreign railway operator, right? So this is an example where there are many sellers, but there is only one buyer. So this is how the competition in the market is actually distorted or imperfect. Understood? So a market in which there is large number of sellers for a particular product, but each seller sells somewhat differentiated but close product. These are terms that what? Anyone, can you answer me? Is current telecom sector imperfect? Yes. There are only handful amount of companies, Jio, Airtel, which are providing good connectivity, whereas if you have Vodafone or BSNL connection, you won't be getting signal and won't be getting fast internet. So this is an example of oligopoly, as there are only few sellers like Jio, Vodafone. Yes, Rahmatullah, Kumar, Adarsh, it is an example of monopolistic competition, as there are many sellers. As I told you, luxury watchmakers, there are many sellers, but they sell watches, but these are different watches. So if a person likes Omega, they might not be liking Rolex, or they might not be liking Titan, right? Now, monopoly means what? Does it mean single buyer or single seller? Monopoly means single seller. What did I give you example? Indian Railways, right? This is a perfect example of how monopoly happens. Now, a market in which there are few number of large firms, these are called as what? I told you right now, oligopoly. Whereas only two firms they were to be existed. Like for example, in food delivery, you only have an option of ordering food from either Zomato or Swiggy. Or if you're getting a cab, you only have two options, Ola, Uber. There are other options, but there are lesser options, right? Mostly people rely on Ola, Uber. What if you want to deliver food? You can call the restaurant directly, or you can order food from Zomato and Swiggy. These are examples of what duopoly. But for today's example, only few large number of firms, these are oligopoly, as I told you with the example of transportation sector. Now let us understand the factors of production. So for example, undertaking the productive process, you generally need four items. First is land, where you will set a factory at, or where you will get your agriculture done. Land only, right? So land is the first factor of production, and the return of land is what? It is actually rent. Now, to undertake production, you need labor, you need hands who will work in your factory, who will work in your farms, and this will be provided by labor. And what you will pay that labor back in form of wages or salary, right? Now, to undertake any economic process, you need capital, right? To set up your factory, you need loans from the banks. To buy seeds, fertilizers, you need loans. These are examples of capital. And how you will pay back in capital? You will provide loans, you will give back in form of interest. Also, you need an individual who will be willing to take risks. For example, farmer, even if they are growing crops, so there might be a chance that that crop might be destroyed by any natural calamity or drought or excessive rainfall. So that person must be first of all willing to take risk in any economic activity. What if a person sets up a factory, but that business does not work well, right? So there is a possibility that the person who is investing in a particular business, that business might fail and he might be making any loss. But there's also possibility that his businesses succeeds and he makes a handsome amount of profit, right? So these are examples of factors of production. First is land, for which you pay rent. Second is labor, for which you pay wages. Third one is services, for which you pay interest. And the fourth one is entrepreneurship, for which you pay profit. So these are factors of production. Now let us understand the concept of demand and supply, which is the cardinal rule in economics. Now what is demand? For example, you want to buy any goods or services, that is called as a demand. For example, during the festivals, you may have seen Amazon coming up with Prime Day sales, Flipkart coming up with big $1 billion sale. What happens in those sales? The companies, they reduce the prices of any item. And what people do, by seeing that the prices of their popular items have reduced, they want to buy those goods and services. For example, the prices of mobile phones, they reduce drastically, particularly iPhones, during these sales. So when prices of any good item reduces, their demand goes up. As you may have heard of news that these platforms, they are selling hundreds and thousands of iPhones every day in the sale events. So the law of demand actually states that whenever you reduce the prices of any goods and services, their demand actually increases. And please remember this law of demand. Now, there are exceptions to the laws of demand also, that in every case, whenever the prices of items reduce, their demand won't go up, or whenever prices of any item increases, their demand, which actually should be less in normal circumstances, they won't happen in cases of exceptions. So what are these goods? For example, there are examples of Veblen goods, which are examples of luxurious items. For example, if the luxurious item, its prices increase, what happens? That the desirability of people in holding those goods increases because they see their aspiration in those goods. Earlier, this was the case with respect to iPhones, as earlier iPhones were available at 70,000-80,000, but the best iPhone right now, they are available at 1.5 lakh rupees, right? So person, they see that iPhone, which is the most expensive one, as a style statement or as a statement that they are doing well in their life. And these are examples of luxurious items, also known as Veblen goods. So as the prices of these Veblen goods, they increase, their demand also increases because people think that they will be getting a status symbol if they possess these kind of luxurious goods. On the other hand, there are some inferior goods also whose with increase in their prices, their demand also increases. And let me explain this to you and with the help of very common example. So for example, you're eating 50 kilograms of food every month that consists of 40 kilograms of rice and 10 kilograms of dal or pulses. Okay. And you require this to sustain you and your family's food requirements for the entire month. And earlier, the prices of rice, suppose in 2023, rice was available at rupees 5 per kilogram, whereas dal or pulses in 2023, it was available at 10 rupees per kilogram, or sorry, for example, 20 rupees per kilogram. So this is how you will be requiring 40 kilograms of rice and 10 kilograms of dal, which means 200 rupees you will be spending on rice and 200 rupees you will be spending on dal every month. So sum total of your expenditure every month to fill your stomach and your family stomach is 400 rupees. But what if the prices of rice, it increases from 5 to 6 rupees per kilogram, right? So what happens in that case? Suppose you are buying 40 kilograms of rice every month. Now the prices that you will be required to pay is 240 rupees, and you will be requiring, and if the prices of dal remains at 10 rupees and you will be purchasing 10 kilograms of dal, you will be spending, sorry, it was 20 rupees, right? So you'll be spending 400 rupees on dal. So now with the increase in prices of rice, the sum total of money that you will be paying every month has increased from 400 rupees to 440 rupees, right? But you don't have that extra 40 rupees, but you need to fill the stomach of your household by eating 50 kilograms worth of rice and dal every month. So what you do is that you increase the consumption of rice from 40 kilogram to 43 kilograms, and you reduce your consumption of dal to just 7 kilograms, and you'll say, I'll dilute my dal more with water, but I have to fill my stomach first. So I need more rice, even though the prices of rice are increasing. So by newer prices, so for example, 43 into 6 is 258, and 7 kilograms of dal at 20 rupees is 140. So the sum total of money you will be spending by eating 43 kilograms of rice and 7 kilogram of dal is 398 rupees, and you still save 2 rupees. So this is an example of give and good, that rice is an inferior item, but since the prices of rice is increased, you are forced to buy much more rice. So that is why the demand for rice is also increasing because of increase in price, and that is why this is an example or exception to the law of demand. Also, there are cases in which certain speculative effect drives the increase in demand even if there is an increase in prices of a product. For example, there's a stock whose prices is rising, and people think that in future the prices are expected to rise further. So what they do is they increase buying that stock, highlighting the increase in demand. But when people, they are buying increased amount of stock, their prices increases, and hence it is an exception to the law of demand. Now, what is a supply? We understood what demand is. That is, the demand for any goods and services in the market reflects the overall demand. And with increase in prices, the demand falls, whereas with reduction in prices, the demand goes up. That was the law of demand. Now, what is supply? Supply is availability of goods and services in the market at a particular price point. And what is the law of supply? That with increase in prices, the companies will look to increase the supply of their product, because when the prices increase, the companies will make more profit out of it, and hence to look or to make more profit, they'll increase the supply of goods and services in the market. And the impact with which the supply changes with the increase in prices is what is known as elasticity of the prices. So for example, perfect elastic supply and perfectly inelastic supply. Perfectly inelastic supply is that the prices of any item increases by 1%. its supply will not change at all. That is an example of inelastic supply or perfectly inelastic supply. Whereas increase in 1% prices leads to infinite increase in supply. It is known as perfectly elastic supply, that you stretch the supply by infinite times. But with increase in prices, if you are not able to increase the supply, that is known as perfect inelastic supply. So these are the two extremes of elasticity of supply, that is changes in supply with respect to increase in prices. Now unitary elastic supply means unitary. What does unitary means? One. So by increase in 1% of prices, if you are increasing the supply by 1%, that is an example of unitary elastic supply. Whereas relatively elastic supply is between infinity and 1%, that is by increase in 1% of price. If you are increasing the supply by more than 1%, that is an example of relatively elastic supply. Whereas relatively inelastic supply means 1% increase in prices but less than 1% increase in supply. That is a process of relatively inelastic supply. So for sake of remembering this, remember the two extremes. Perfectly elastic supplies with increase in 1% of prices, infinite increase in supply. Whereas perfectly inelastic supply means increase in 1% prices, it leads to zero changes in the supply. And everything is between. That is, unitary is 1% increase in supply, 1% increase in prices. Relative supply is 1% increase in prices and more than 1% increase in supply. Whereas relatively inelastic is 1% increase in supply and less than 1% increase in 1% increase in prices and less than 1% increase in supply. I hope I've made this items very clear. Now we have completed the first part of our lecture, that is sectors or basics of economy. Now we move to the second part, that is national income accounting. We'll be dealing now with the second part of our discussion, that is national income accounting. Now any country, developed, small, developing, any nation, they'd want to know, right, what kind of goods and services they are producing, which sector is contributing to production of goods and services more. That we understood in our previous discussion that India predominantly is a service sector economy right now. Earlier it was a primary or agricultural based economy. And how does any country knows that? That is by the process of national income accounting. Now, India knows right now that it is not a big manufacturer or a big sector as far as secondary sector is concerned. So that also has been determined by national income accounting. So the process which determines various aspects of production of goods and services, that are examples of national income accounting. Now, the main indicator of national income accounting is known as gross domestic product or GDP. What is GDP, if you may ask? That is actually the final market value of final goods and services which are produced within the geographical boundary of India. So, what you have to remember, these are final goods and services produced in geographic boundary of India. So, we'll be understanding what is final goods and services, what are geographical boundary. And this is what the definition of GDP is. But before understanding the various aspects of GDP, you have to understand the very basic difference between factor cost, basic price, and market price. And why am I telling you the difference between these three items? Is because India periodically, like every country, revises how it determines or how it calculates the national income or the GDP. Now, the last revision that Indian government made was in the January 2015. As earlier, India used to determine GDP at factor cost. Now it calculates GVA at basic price and GDP at market price. So these are the three terms: factor cost, basic price, and market price, and how these are different. Let us try to understand this. Is everyone watching it? And am I audible? Please let me know in the comments. Kumar, Rahmatullah, Adarsh, Surjit, Priyanka. Yes, good. Now, to understand factor cost, basic price, market price, you have to first understand the difference between production taxes and product taxes. Now, production taxes, these are taxes that you give when you're setting up of your production units. For example, you must be buying land to establish a factory on it. For that, you have to pay land revenue. To buy land, you have to give stamp duty. So these kind of examples or these kind of taxes are known as production taxes, and there is a very important characteristic of production taxes that while setting up a factory, if you buy land and if you pay land revenue stamp factor, it does not depend upon what kind of products or you're manufacturing or what kind of or how many products you're manufacturing. So irrespective of the fact that your factory produces 10,000 units every year or you produce 1 lakh units every year, you will have to pay land revenue irrespective of the factors of production. So this production tax, it does not or it does not changes. Does it change with production? The answer is no. That while buying a land, you have to pay a fixed amount of taxes, and these are called as production taxes. That are land revenue, stamp duty, excise duty on land, etc. Now, there is another category of taxes. These are known as product taxes. For example, you must be buying any items. For that, you have to pay GST, or to import any items, the factories will have to pay custom duty on that good. So actually these kind of taxes, they depend on the product. So more products you are manufacturing or more raw material you are importing, the more will be the custom duty, and more products that you are selling in the market, GST will be applied on a per product base. For example, for a biscuit, if you're paying 5% of GST, so similarly, if you buy two amount of biscuits, the GST or the amount of GST that you're paying, it increases. So this actually changes with production. So these are the differences between the product taxes and production taxes, and these are used in calculating factor cost, basic prices and market prices. Let us try to understand this how. Now, what is first of all factor cost? It refers to cost of production that is incurred by a firm while producing the goods. So, for example, you must be buying a piece of land or you must be hiring laborers. For that, you have to pay them with wages, or you must be getting loans from banks. For that, you have to pay interest. An entrepreneur undertaking production activities might be getting their profit, and also on the land that you buy or rent, you have to pay rent. So these are examples of factor cost. Now you have to understand there are no taxes that are levied in incurring or calculation of factor cost. These are just you add the cost of production that goes while you're producing any item. Now the second item in this line is called as basic price. And how do you get basic prices? You have to first of all add factor cost here. Now I told you, right, there are certain production taxes that you have to pay once you are setting up a factory, right? So you have to add that taxes if you want to calculate the basic prices. But while undertaking or buying any items or undertaking or setup of any factory, there is a possibility that the government might have extended subsidy on it. For example, you require electricity, right, to undertake any production activity. But what if the government is providing you that electricity at a cheaper cost? So that is an electricity subsidy. What if you're purchasing MSP from the market or you're purchasing wheat from the market? That wheat itself must have been subsidized by the government. So in order to achieve basic prices, you have to minus subsidies to it. So when you add taxes and you minus subsidies to it, what you get, or these are production taxes and production subsidies. So these are the examples of basic prices. But before selling that item in market prices, are these market prices just basic prices? The answer is no. Because once you're selling goods into the market, that goods will be subjected to product taxes and product subsidies. So to arrive at market prices from basic prices, you have to add, first of all, basic prices. Then you have to add product taxes, because the prices that any you and I pay in the market, cost or taxes are added to it. And also, what is the government is subsidizing that product in the market. So you have to minus subsidies to it. So when you add production taxes and minus product subsidies on it, what you get is basic prices after the market prices. Okay. So this is how factor cost is different from basic prices and market prices is different from factor cost and basic prices. First, you calculate factor cost by adding all the cost of production that a factory or an entrepreneur has incurred in that production process. Then if you add factor cost with production taxes and production subsidies that are irrespective or that does not change with the amount of production, you get basic prices. And when you add basic prices with product taxes and subsidies, what you get is market prices. Understood the difference between these three? Now we'll try to calculate, or we'll understand in later slides, how these factor cost, basic prices and market price differ in calculation of GDP. Now, what are the elements or what kind of factors are considered when estimating GDP or gross domestic product in any country? I told you, right, the definition of GDP, it says final value of goods and services. So does it include raw material? Why is it behaving strangely? So does it include raw material, or do you add value of raw materials also? Because, for example, India only produces bread. So what do you require to add in the bread? Does it require the value of wheat which is used to produce the bread? The answer is no. Because the final value of bread, it also includes the value of wheat. So just by estimating how much bread you are producing in the economy, you can estimate the final goods and services, and hence the cost of intermediate or raw material, they have to be deducted when you're calculating GDP to it. Also, calculation of GDP means you are estimating or calculating final value of goods and services of only those products that are manufactured in your domestic territory. And the definition of domestic territory is not just geographical boundaries of India, but it also includes embassies of India that are located in other countries, because these embassies, for all practical purposes, that are Indian territory in foreign lands. So any Indian employee who is working in embassy, or any fees that has been charged by embassy for delivery of visas of India, that are also added to the GDP. What about aeroplanes as well as ships or Air India planes that are taking passengers from Delhi to New York? So does the services of tickets that are being charged by Air India on its planes, will it be included in domestic territory? The answer is yes. So does ships that carry Indian products into external markets. But these planes and ships, they have to be belong to Indian companies in general. So all of these are included in domestic territory. But do you consider residents? Or what if an Indian citizen working in Saudi Arabia as a construction manager is? So does his salary will be calculated in GDP's production? The answer is no. But what if a foreign or South Korean worker working in Hyundai plant located in Chennai? So will his salary be included in India's GDP? The answer is yes, because that foreign person, although a citizen of South Korea, but he's working in Chennai factory of Hyundai. So he's located inside geographical boundaries of India. So that is why his salary will be added. Whereas an Indian citizen working in foreign country like Saudi Arabia, his salary will not be included in GDP because he's located out of Indian territory. However, any Indian foreign services officer working in embassy or Indian embassy, say in US, his salary will be included because embassy is a geographical, for all practical purposes, is a part of Indian territory. Now, what if you're getting gifts or scholarship? These are examples of transfer payment because you are getting these remuneration, gifts, and scholarship without exchange of any goods and services. So these transfer payment, they are not included in the calculation of GDP because no economic activity is taking places in transfer of these payments. So that is why you include final value of goods and services and you do not consider the value of raw material that are used in production of final goods and services, because ultimately the final goods and services, they have the adequate amount of money which includes the value of raw material also. Whereas calculation of GDP is done in domestic territory, which means not just geographical boundaries of India, but also Indian economic assets like planes and ships, and also Indian territories which are located in foreign countries like military bases, embassies, etc. All of these items, they are included in India's GDP. But when it comes to residences, it does not calculate whether or not that citizen is Indian or not. Rather, what it requires to understand is that if any foreign national, if he or she is working in India or in a factory located in India, his or her salary is added to GDP. Whereas Indian citizen working in Saudi Arabia or UAE, his or her salary will be deducted from GDP. Whereas as far as transfer payment is concerned, which are transfers of money, gifts, etc., without incurring of any economic activity or production of goods and services, these have to be deducted from calculation of GDP. Adarsh, you're saying no. What no about? Can you explain it to me in the comments? Now, in the meantime, until Adarsh replies, I'll be starting with circular flow of economy, because this circular flow of income, it is very necessary before you start understanding how we calculate GDP in India. Now, suppose in an ideal scenario, forget everything. They are just households and there are firms producing goods and services. And there is no other factor involved in an economy, just for the sake of, sir, raw material and resident explanation. See, I told you, right? The values of raw material, these are not included when we estimate GDP. As far as residence is concerned, we do not consider whether that person is Indian citizen or not when it comes to estimating GDP. But what it matters to us is whether or not that person is working inside India or outside India. So, for example, any foreign citizen, even if he or she is working in a factory located in India, so their salary is added to GDP. Whereas, even if an Indian citizen is working outside India, like in Saudi Arabia, UAE, US, their salaries will have to be deducted from India's GDP. Understood? Or they are not considered in India's GDP. I hope I have made everything clear. So, let us now resume our understanding of circular flow of income. Now, for example, households, they are providing factors of production like land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship to firms. So, this is how Indian households provide factors of production to the firms. Now, in return of these factors of production, these firms, they pay Indian households with wages, interest, profit, and rent, as I've already told you. Right? So these are payments made by the firms in exchange of the services that the household have rendered to firms in undertaking production activities. For example, household, they contribute labor to firms who work in firms to manufacture goods and services. These households, they are providing loans to the firms so that they can use the money to undertake production activities. These households, one of these household members, they ultimately will be the owner of the firm, right? So they will be getting profit out of that economic operation. And also firms, they will be providing or selling the land to firms, based on which the firms will be providing them with the rent. So this is how the exchange of the factors of production and payment of these factors of production are made by the firms. Now, using the money that the households are earning from the funds in form of payment, what households do is that they pay these money, or they undertake expenditure to get or buy goods and services from the firm. So after they have made expenditure to the firm for payment of goods and services, the firms give them the respective product. Understand? So this is an ideal explanation of circular flow of income. That first of all, households are rendering various kind of factors of production to firms, based on which the firms are providing with them the necessary payment of wages, interest, profit and rent. Whereas on the other hand, using that payment income which the households have gotten from firms, they are giving that money, and based on this money received from the households in form of expenditure, the firms are giving them the goods and services, which is the product. So this is how the circular flow of income happens. Now, if we estimate the total amount of factors of payment or the rendering of payment for factors of production, if it is done for GDP, it is known as payment method of the estimating of GDP. Whereas if we calculate the entire expenditure made by the firms, it is known as expenditure method of calculating the GDP. Whereas the supply of final goods and services, if we add the final value of all the products that is transferred from firms to household, will be able to estimate the total amount of GDP in India based on the product method. So these are the three methods based on which the GDP is calculated. So let us understand this in detail one by one. First is known as product method, or also known as value added method. Now, what is the value added method? In this method, the national income of any country is estimated by calculating the value addition done by the firms at each stages of production. So how do we calculate value added method? Let me understand this to you with the help of a very simple example. So for example, any farmer is producing wheat worth of 100 rupees. So that farmer might be consuming 50 rupees worth of wheat himself, or his family must be consuming that wheat for making rotis, etc. And what if he sells that rest 50 amount of wheat or 50 rupees worth of wheat to any bread manufacturing company? And using the wheat which it has purchased from farmers, the company manufactures bread worth of 200 rupees. So what will be the GDP based on the value added method? I told you, right, the value of raw material, it is deducted from GDP. So the value addition done by the firm which is manufacturing the bread, that is manufacturing bread worth of 200 rupees, is that you have to deduct 200 rupees, and you have to deduct the raw material cost that the firm incurred in purchasing the wheat from the farmer. So you deduct 50 rupees. So the net value addition done by bread factory is 150 rupees. Whereas the farmer, it is manufacturing 100 rupees worth of wheat without any income or any input whatsoever. So the value addition by farmer in cultivating the wheat will be 100 rupees. So we deduct the value of raw material from the bread manufacturing company, whereas the rest 100 rupees worth of wheat, it was cultivated by farmer without any income or without any intermediate. Let us assume that. So in cases of value added method here, the GDP of that country, if it is just manufacturing wheat and bread, it will be rupees 150, which is value addition made by bread, in addition to rupees 100, which is value addition made by the farmer. Therefore, the GDP of this country will be 250 rupees. Understood? So when you add the final value or gross value added of each and every product or manufacturing that is happening in the country, that is how you get the GDP by value addition method. Understood? Anyone? You have any doubt? Adarsh, Priyanka, Kumar, Rahmatullah, Surjeet, anyone? No? So I'm moving to another. Now, what is actually added or what is actually considered in estimating the GDP as far as value added method? For example, goods and services sold in the market, they are considered, as I told you, bread, it is being sold in the market, and also farmer is selling the wheat. So these are added or considered when estimating the GDP based on the value added method. Also services which are provided by the agent considered, and also rent, which is very important component of production process, these are added. What is imputed rent? For example, you own the land themselves, you own the land based on which you set up the factory yourself. So technically, you must be paying any amount of rent every month, even hypothetically, if you don't add the entire amount of money that you spend in purchasing that land. So theoretically, you must be paying a significant amount of rent every month for that production process. This is an example of imputed rent. And also, if you're using your money itself for undertaking capital purposes, that is also included in the interest in form of imputed interest. So, does is considers buying and selling of second hand goods? The answer is no, because the first time that second hand good was produced, its value was added to the GDP. Rather, you're selling a second hand good, so the value of money that you spend on buying a second hand good, it is not considered when you're adding or considering the GDP. Also, as I told you, transfer payments like scholarship, pensions, which do not incur exchange of any goods and services, these are also excluded from the calculation of GDP. Understood? Now let us move to another method that is known as income method. I told you, right? Households, they provide services to the firms, and for payment of these services like labor, capital, uh, uh, rent or land, and also the entrepreneurship, these firms, they repay back in form of the money that is in exchange for the services that have been provided by household. So if you add any item which has been incurred as an income by the households, you are adding each and every income. As I told you, right, factors of production, it includes land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So for land, you are providing with rent. For labor, you are providing them with wages. For capital, you are providing them with interest. And for entrepreneurship, you're providing that entrepreneur with profit. So if you add all these four type of payments, that is Vipar, remember this, as there is a company called as Wipro. So if you remember all these four items, when you add all these items in an economy, you'll be getting the GDP based on the income method, because each and every household, they are rendering some kind of services to the firms, and based on these services, the firms, they are making them some kind of a payment, which is an income for these households. So when you add each and every sources of income, that is wages, interest, profit, and rent, this is how you calculate GDP based on the income method. Now, this income method, these are categorized into three different categories. First is a compensation to employees, which includes wages, salaries, and some kind of contribution the employees made in social security schemes like EPF, etc. Dearness allowances, all of these are incomes of the employees, and hence these are considered in the calculation of GDP. Also, firms, they might be generating some kind of operating surplus like rent, profit, royalty, interest. Profit includes corporate taxes, dividends, undistributed profit. All of these are added to the cultivation or calculation of GDP. Also, mixed income gained by the self-employed people, like income from their day-to-day businesses or the money that farmers, doctors, lawyers, they make. All of these are added, and this is what constitutes the income method of GDP. Understood the difference between value added and income method? Value added is summation of all the value added in manufacturing of goods and services, and here you minus the value of raw material, and you have to consider only the final goods that have been sold in the market, not the raw material which is exchanged between one company to another company. Whereas in the calculation based on income method, you use all the factors of production and add the value of uh, exchange of those factors of production in calculating the GDP as far as income method is concerned. Now let us consider the third way of calculating GDP, that is called as expenditure method. Now I told you, right, the money that the households are getting from the firms, they are spending that money in buying goods and services, and that is by understanding or adding all the consumption or expenditure that are made by households, you get the GDP by expenditure method. And these are expenditures incurred on buying the final products which are produced in the production units. And these are categorized into four different categories. For example, households, they make various kind of consumption expenditures, that they buy bread, milk, etc. Government, it makes certain expenditures, we'll understand this later on. So you add consumption expenditure, that is private consumption, that you consume items themselves and you buy these items from the market. These are all examples of consumption expenditure, and in paper you'll see this as a private final consumption expenditure. Do not get disturbed by it, it just highlights the consumption expenditure made by the Indian households. Now there is another kind of expenditures that the government makes in purchasing any items from the market for its own consumption expenditure, and this is added separately, called as the head of government expenditure. Now both government and firms, they make many kind of investments, like they buy computer for their businesses, they buy machinery for undertaking the production process. All of these are seen as an investment. Why am I calling it as an investment? Because although they are buying machinery, but the benefits of this machinery will be used in years to come, right? That this machinery will be manufacturing goods and services. A firm might be buying a computer and they might be using that computer to digitize their own businesses, to provide support to their consumer staffs and customers. So all of these are examples of investment expenditure, and in this, the investment expenditure by private sector, by government, all of this are added, and this is known as gross final uh, GFCF, that is gross final capital expenditure. Understood? GFCE. So if you watch in the newspapers the term known as GFCE, it is an example of investment expenditures. Whereas government expenditure, it is also a part of calculation of the expenditure method. Now Indians, they also expend money or they spend money on imports of various items. But will these imports be calculated in India's GDP? The answer is no, because imports, they are sourced from different countries. So for example, if you're importing crude oil from Saudi Arabia, so that crude oil must be extracted in Saudi Arabia, and hence all the cost that was incurred in extraction of crude oil in Saudi Arabia will be added to the GDP of Saudi Arabia, not to the GDP of India, because you are importing that crude oil. So therefore, in estimating the GDP, you add the value of exports, because you are not selling that item in India, but you are exporting it to another country, but it was manufactured in India. Therefore, you have to add export, and to that you have to minus all the items that you have imported from other country. And this is known as net export, which is the difference between exports and imports in the country. And why we are adding exports? Because we are not selling this item in India, but we are manufacturing this item in India. So that is why the final value of exports is added to GDP. Whereas you have to reduce the amount of spending that you have done on importing any good, because that good was not manufactured in India, but in another country. So for example, if you are importing the microprocessors from Taiwan, you have to minus the value of money that you spend on importing microprocessors, because that microprocessors was manufactured in Taiwan, and hence the GDP calculation of Taiwan will include the manufacturing of the microprocessors. Whether you are importing it in India, therefore you have to minus it in the India's GDP. So from this value, GDP becomes the sum total of consumption of households, investment made by both government and the private sector, the consumption of government in meeting its day-to-day expenses, consumption expenditure, as well as the difference between exports and imports, that is So this is how you calculate GDP using the expenditure method. Now you'll be surprised if you know this. If you calculate GDP by any method, the sum total of GDP will be same irrespective of the method. Understood? So this is how you calculate GDP based on different methods. Now the consumption or contribution of these sectors in India's GDP is that consumption expenditure contributes roughly 60% to India's GDP. Investment expenditure contributes roughly 30% to India's GDP. Government expenditure contributes roughly 10% to GDP, whereas the contribution of net exports to India's GDP is negative because India imports more item than it exports. So roughly the contribution is shared by consumption expenditure at the highest 60%, investment expenditure at 30%, whereas government expenditure or consumption expenditure of government contributes 10% to India's GDP. Understood? Now, which of the following factors is or are accounted for in the calculation of gross domestic product in India in the expenditure method? Now, please answer this in the comment section. You all guys are very inactive right now. You must be feeling asleep, right? But if I'm taking this session late in the evening after taking class in the afternoon, so you might as well attend this session lively, right? Answer this quickly. Which of the following is or are accounted for calculation of gross domestic product in India's expenditure method? Answer this. Adarsh, Priyanka, Kumar, Rahmatullah, Surjit. D. Rahmatullah says D. Is he right, everyone? Kumar D. Adarsh D. Priyanka, where are you? Surjit. प्रियंका डी. सुरजीत ने नहीं बोला. कहां है सुरजीत? Excuse me if I use Hindi. This session has to be in English. Yes, all of you are right. All of the above is right. Private consumption is added. Government investment and government spending is added. Net expenditure on export and import is added. Therefore, all of the above is right. What is net? That is the difference between exports and import is what you call as net expenditure. Right? Now another question, which of the following method is not used to determine national income of a country? Answer me. Everyone. Rahmatullah, Kumar, Adarsh, Priyanka. Answer this. Adarsh, Rahmatullah, you both are incorrect. Input method I told you, right? It is another name for gross value added. Investment method is actually not used in calculation of GDP. Therefore, investment method is right. Input is that gross value added you calculate. Output method is that the final value of goods and services you calculate. Income method is that you add all the income method. So that is why investment method is not used in calculating of GDP, as investment is only one part of GDP, not the entire part of GDP. Now, whatever GDP you get currently in this year is known as nominal GDP, because if you add total monetary value of all goods and services produced in any financial year, that is called as nominal GDP, and it is also known as GDP at current prices. So suppose in 2023 India was producing 100 unit of breads, just 100 units of breads, and the cost of each bread was rupees 10. So what will be India's GDP in 2023? That is 1000 rupees, right? And 2024, suppose India manufactures 100 units of bread again, but the price of bread it increased from 10 to 15 rupees. So India's GDP in 2024 will be 1500 rupees, right? So from this data, you will be able to say that with respect to 2023, in 2024, India's GDP increased by 50%. But does this mean India's GDPs or India is actually growing? The answer is no. Why? Because it was just the prices of bread that has resulted into increase in India's GDP, not the total production. Where in both these years, India is just producing 100 units of bread, but just the prices of the bread has increased. That is why India's GDP has increased by 50%, and this is the nominal GDP. That you add the current prices in the year with the production of that year, you get nominal GDP. So this is actually not the ideal case of estimating India's GDP or gross domestic product. So rather, instead of nominal GDP, that is GDP at current price, how we calculate GDP really is the GDP at constant prices. And what we do in GDP or real GDP is that total monetary value of all final goods and services produced in domestic territory of a country in any given financial year, it is valued at a constant price. And for estimating the constant price, we make any year as a base year in that region. And the process of getting real GDP is that your product or GDP is adjusted for inflation so as to reflect the changes in real output. So, in cases on context of GDP growth or economic growth in the country, what we quote is not nominal GDP, rather real GDP at constant prices. Because in our previous example, I told you, right? Although we were producing 100 units of bread in both years, but just because the prices of bread had increased, our GDP increased by 50%, but that does not contribute or highlight that our production of bread has increased. So as to eliminate this kind of possibility from happening and selling us that the idea that our GDP has increased, we need any base year, right? So for example, in 2022, if we determine base year and the prices of bread was 10 rupees in general. So what we do in that every year following 2022 or base year, we use the prices of the base year and we multiply it with the amount of production that happens in that particular year. So for example, in 2022, the value of bread was rupees 10. In 2023, the value of bread was rupees 12. And 2024, the value of bread was rupees 15. And in this year, we were producing 100 breads. In this year, we were producing 120 breads. And this year, we were producing 150 breads. So the GDP or real GDP in 2023 will be 120 breads multiply with the number or prices of bread in the base year, because we have highlighted that 2022 is base year. So we multiply it with 10 and the GDP or real GDP of 2023 will be 1200 rupees. Whereas in 2024, we are producing 150 units of bread, but we have to multiply the cost of bread of base year 2022. Therefore, the GDP of India in 2024 will be 1500 rupees. So, when you compare these two GDP, you will actually know that the increase in GDP is because of the fact that we are producing more bread, whereas the prices of bread we have fixed as per the prices that were there in base year. Understood the difference? Rehmatullah, Kumar, Priyanka, Adarsh, do you have any doubt in how we estimate real GDP as compared to nominal GDP? Nominal GDP, we add the value of bread that are prevailing in the current year. That is why it is said as GDP in current prices. Whereas in real GDP, we have a constant price of a base year and we estimate the GDP of the production happening in this year with the prices of base year. So that we estimate the actual amount of GDP increase that is happening in the country and we understand that the GDP is actually increasing or not. So if we are to multiply both of these production in this year, we'll see that the GDP has remained constant because the value of bread was fixed rather than increasing. Understood the difference between nominal and real GDP? Now, if we divide technically real GDP with nominal GDP, don't you think we'll be able to estimate inflation that is happening? because nominal GDP, it takes into account the inflation, and that is why the increase in GDP may be due to increase in production and also due to inflation. But when it comes to real GDP, sorry, we are negating the impact of inflation. So the ratio of nominal GDP with that of real GDP, if we divide it, we get an idea of what is known as GDP deflator. So the ratio of final goods and services produced in an economy in a particular year at current year prices to that of prices during the base year, that is constant prices or real GDP, we get an figure which is known as GDP deflator, and this is an ideal measure to estimate inflation in the country. Now we'll be understanding the different methods of calculating inflation in our subsequent lectures, not today. So I'll be picking up GDP deflator again in the next session where we'll be understanding the inflation, right? So for today's perspective, what you have to remember or understand is that when we divide nominal GDP with real GDP, what we get as a figure is called as deflator. And this deflator or GDP deflator, it tells us the levels of prevailing inflation with respect to the current year with that of constant year. Understood? Now let us try to solve this question. In which of the following statement is or are correct by GDP deflator? Is first statement right? Is it the ratio of nominal GDP to real GDP? Yes, it is right. Is it a measure of inflation in the economy? Yes, it is. It measures the variation of price levels of import but not exports. What did I tell you about calculating GDP? We add the value of exports and we minus the value of imports. So any calculation of GDP, be it GDP deflator, nominal GDP or real GDP, it will include the value of exports and it will eliminate or reduce the value of imports. Therefore, third statement becomes incorrect. It measures the variation in price levels of exports and not imports, right? Exports is calculated, import is not. Therefore, third statement is incorrect. So, correct option is option A. Priyanka, Kumar, both of you are right. Option A is correct. Good. Now, let us understand some of the idea about base year. Why do we need a base year? I've told you that idea. But how do we calculate or how do we estimate which area or which year, particular year is a base year? And this year is actually chosen to enable interior comparison in the national accounts that I've told you. Now, this is a reference year with respect to which GDP numbers is calculated and we compare the prices that were prevailing in base year with that of actual production that is happening in the current year. And it tells us actually whether or not GDP is increasing just because we are producing more units of bread, items, goods, services, etc. So any year is fixed as a base year if it was particularly a normal year in growth, where the prices of goods and items were constant, they were not increasing or decreasing rapidly. So these kind of years are faced as a big year, and currently the financial year of 2011 and 2012 is what is calculated, or the prices that were prevailing back then, it is used for base year purposes, and this was fixed in the method or amendment in GDP's calculation back in 2015. So the base year that we use right now is 2011-12 because in this year India's economy was good. The prices were really constant. It did not increase or reduce much. Therefore, this kind of a stable year gives us a very ideal year to be used as a base year. And the current base year you have to remember is 2011 and 12. Now, which of the following statement is incorrect? All of you who are watching it, please answer me this question in the comments. In the meantime, I'll wear a jacket as the AC is quite cold right now. Priyanka, Kumar, which of the following is incorrect? Adarsh, Kumar, Rahmatullah, C. Yes, you are right. Now GDP at current year prices is nominal GDP, we are understood, right? At base year prices it is called GDP, real GDP. GDP deflator is a measure of inflation in the economy, right? Nominal GDP is always greater than real GDP. It is incorrect, because what if the inflation at the constant or the base year was quite less, and if the inflation of GDP is also less than in current year, then our nominal GDP will theoretically be less than real GDP. You all are right. Now, which of the following statement is or are correct about GDP calculations in India? The base year for calculation of GDP in India is 2011-12, correct? Base effect is the distortion in current GDP figures caused by exceptionally high or low levels of inflation in the previous year. Yes, and this question I took actually to explain what is base effect. Now, base effect is any effect whether the production or prices in particular year was quite less. Suppose India was manufacturing 10 units of bread in 2020, and in 2022 India started manufacturing 20 units of bread. Understood? So from this point of view, you can say that our GDP increased by 100% because we doubled our production in the year 2021 as compared to 2020, right? So, but the increase in production was what? 10 units of bread. But in 2023, after Indian economy has picked up after COVID, we started manufacturing 100 units of bread, and in 2024, we started manufacturing more bread, that is 110. So in this area or in this following year also, we increased our annual bread production by 10 units, whereas in from 2020 to 21, we also increased our production of bread by 10%. But here, India's GDP increased only by 10% from 100 to 110, whereas in 2020 till 21, our production doubled from 10 to 20 units, therefore our GDP became 100%. So just because the value of bread which was produced in 2020, it was so low that even by increasing 10 units of bread, we were getting 100% of growth. Whereas in this year also we increased our bread production by 10%, but our GDP increased only by 10%. So this is the example of base effect. Similarly, if the prices was quite low in 1 year and if the prices increase next year, the base effect highlights that the value of prices or production was so low in 1 year that it leads to higher amount of GDP next year. This is what base effect is. Understood, everyone? Is there any doubt relating to base effect? This was in news particularly during COVID times because our GDP fell so much during 2020 that in 2021 even a minor increase in GDP highlighted that the percentage of increase was quite high, which was originally not the case because our original GDP fell by such a huge amount of value. This is why low base effect is term used in calculating or telling the GDP. Am I clear, everyone? Now, there is another concept called as potential GDP. What is potential GDP? For example, if any factory might have the production capacity of manufacturing 100 units of bread, right? So it may be the capacity of the factory. But what if the demand of bread is just 80 units? So instead of manufacturing 100 units or full capacity, the factory is manufacturing just 80 units because this is the demand by the market. So theoretically, the factory is not working on its full potential. But what if the factory was working in its full potential? Instead of 80 breads, it might be manufacturing 100 units of bread. What's the answer of that question? Well, second is distortion in current GDP. It's right. First is right. Option is C. Good that you pointed out, Kumar. Now, as I was saying, potential GDP, what if the capacity of a factory is 100 units, but the demand of bread is 80 units? So instead of producing 100 units of bread, factory must just be producing the 80 units of bread, right? So theoretically, if we were to increase the GDP by 100 units, there will not be any distortion in the factory. And this is the idea or estimate of value of output that the economy can produce if the land and capital has been employed at their maximum sustainable rates, and it will lead to steady growth and stable inflation. But what if the demand of bread now becomes 110 units? So the factory will have to increase its capacity from 100 to 110 units, which means hiring of additional labor, expansion of factory. All of this will require higher amount of money, as they have to pay more laborers, they have to pay more land, and this will increase the expenses of the factory. However, when you're paying more money to farmers on laborers, you'll be increasing the money supply, which can lead to inflation. So in case the real GDP, or in cases of here, the actual GDP was less than potential GDP, right? And it does not lead to inflation. And even if you match the potential GDP with actual GDP, it is an idea where there will be no potential because the factory will be employed at their maximum sustainable level. But what if the actual GDP increases or becomes larger than potential GDP? So I told you with this example, the factory will have to establish newer production processes, will have to buy more machines, will have to employ more labor to produce the additional 10 units of bread that is demanded by the economy, and hence it will lead to the situation of inflation. So this is what the concept of potential GDP is, that until unless the maximum potential of that factory is utilized, you will get no inflation. But after a certain period of time, that is more than potential GDP, if your GDP increases more than potential GDP, then there is a chance that there might be inflation in the economy. Understood? Now, potential GDP is best described as what? Answer this fast. I'm getting out of the screen. Where are you guys? Answer it fast. Which is the most right or best describes the potential GDP? Kumar says B. Anyone else? Yes, Rahmatullah and Kumar, you are right. Option B is the correct answer because it is the maximum sustainable level of output that an economy can produce where all factors are fully and efficiently utilized. So B best describes the term of potential GDP, hence it is the right answer. Now, as I told you or missed out on here, the difference between real or actual GDP and potential GDP is known as output gap. So if this output gap is negative or zero, then there is no inflation. But if it is more than 1, then the output gap leads to inflation. Now understood this, let us now solve this question. Which of the following statement is or correct about output gap? Can actual output be never be greater than potential output? It is incorrect. As I told you, there are cases when actual output might be more because of more demand of goods and services. Then the potential output will have to be less than the actual output. Whereas positive output gap is expected with increasing inflation in the economy. I told you, right? Positive output gap is when actual or real GDP is more than potential GDP, and it leads to the problem of the inflation because you are producing more and more goods, employing more labor, spending more on capital, which means more money supply. Therefore, second is right, first is incorrect. Option B here is the right answer. Priyanka, you are right. Rahmatullah, please reread the question again. This time you have gotten it wrong. No problem if you have gotten this wrong. The purpose of these questions is to solidify the teaching of today's class and remove any doubt that may happen in you. D is not the answer because positive output gap I told you, whereas actual GDP is more than potential GDP, therefore it leads to the process of or problem of inflation. Now, I told you the concept of GDP, right? there is another similar concept called as NDP. That is, it was gross domestic product, now it is net domestic product. Now, from moving from G to N, that you have to remember, I'm just easing it out for you. From moving GDP to NDP, what you have to do is to reduce what is known as depreciation. I'll tell you what depreciation is. Now, suppose you might be getting a car and you might be using that car in taxi purposes, right? So, all the income that you might be getting in use of that car as a taxi adds to India's GDP. Understood, right? But that car is supposed to get wear and tear, right? It is also a capital uh, spending for you, as you have bought that car for undertaking businesses of becoming a taxi driver. But that car might be getting wear and tear because the process of moving a car, it leads to damage to tires. It can create a problem where the car might be damaged because of parts getting old. So you might be spending some amount of money every year in maintaining that car or undertaking the maintenance of that car, right? So the amount of money that you're spending in upkeep of that car is because the car is a depreciating asset. As it is used every year, there might be some wear and tear in the car, like damage to the tires, damage to engine, damage to seats, damage to doors, damage to glasses, and all of this are considered as a depreciation, because ultimately the value of that car is reducing and you're spending some income of money on that depreciation so that you can keep the car running and in good condition. So when you minus all the depreciation that is happening in the economy in the capital purposes, for example, factories might be using their machines and hence they require maintenance for that machine. All of this depreciation, if you remove it from GDP, then you get what is known as net domestic product. Understood? So net domestic product, or moving from G to N, you have to remove depreciation from gross domestic product. Understood? Now, which of the following best describes the relation between gross domestic and net domestic product? Tell me this answer quickly. Which of the following is the right answer? Kumar says A. Anyone else? Priyanka, Rahmatullah, Adarsh. Adarsh says D. Kumar says D. I guess. Now, theoretically, also you must be saying that depreciation happens in an economy, right? So, what if the GDP is always greater than NDP, because there is some amount of depreciation that you will minus from GDP and you'll get an NDP which is lesser than GDP. But what if an economy has no capital assets? So in that case, depreciation will be zero. So theoretically, it has to be equal to zero or less than GDP. Therefore, it is not always greater than NDP. There are in some cases when an economy has no depreciating or capital asset, then in that case, GDP becomes equal to NDP. So therefore, first is incorrect. Gross domestic product is always equal to net domestic product. No, there might be cases, as I've told you, when depreciation happens, then GDP becomes more than NDP. Net domestic product is always greater than gross domestic product. Incorrect. So the correct answer is that Priyanka, Rahmatullah, Kumar, Adarsh, all of you have gotten right. Option D is the right answer, because it is equal to gross domestic product minus depreciation, which is always correct. As we have told you, if there is no depreciation, then GDP becomes equal to NDP. And if there isn't depreciation, then GDP is more than NDP. However, in no case NDP will be more than GDP. Please remember that. Therefore, option D here is the best answer because it is always correct. Now, there is another term called as gross national product. I told you about gross domestic product. What is gross national product? So the change here is from domestic to national. What is the difference between these two? Let us understand this. Now, I told you in estimating GDP, right? We calculate the value of final value of products which is manufactured in India's domestic category or India's domestic territory. However, Indian citizens working abroad, we do not consider their income, whereas we consider income of foreign citizens working in India. However, GNP is quite different. GNP, it takes into value of final goods and services which is produced by a citizens of the country in any given financial year. So GDP, it determines where the production is happening, and GNP, it determines whom are producing that item. So here it is a territorial concept. GDP, the GNP is termed, or it is a concept which determines what are the value of final goods and services produced by nationals of any country. So in GNP, we add the amount of income that Indian citizens who are working in US, UAE, Saudi, England, etc., we add their income. Whereas in GNP, we minus the income which is gained by foreign residents who are working in India. Understood? So here the factor that is GNP, it includes GDP, and we add net factor of income from abroad, or also known as NFIA. So does this NFIA includes Indian citizen who is working in Saudi Arabia? Do we add his salary to NFIA? The answer is yes. His or her salary of Indian citizen who will be working in Saudi Arabia, their salary is added in NFIA. Whereas a South Korean national who is working in Hyundai factory in Chennai, his or her salary, what will be doing in NFIA? His or her salary will be reduced or negative to the NFIA. So this is what NFIA is, net factor income abroad. That is, Indian nationals located outside the country and working there, their salaries will be added, whereas foreign nationals living in India, their salaries will be reduced. Similarly, Indian companies like Wipro, TCS, Infosys, if they have their presence in countries like US, the profit that these companies are making out of their operations in the foreign country, they will be added in NFIA. Whereas countries like Google, which is an American company, and the profits made in their businesses will have to be reduced if we were to calculate NFIA. Understood? So it is a concept which determines production is undertaken by whom. If it is undertaken by Indian people anywhere in the world, that is added in NFIA, and if it is undertaken by foreign person living in India, that is has to be reduced from India's NFIA, and then will be able to get GNP. Now, which of the following best describes the concept of gross national product? The total value of final goods and services produced by residents of a country outside its territory, or total value of final goods and services produced by residents of a country within its own territory? No. The total value of final goods and services produced by non-residents of a country within its territory? No. The total value of final goods produced by residents of a country, irrespective of their geographical location, is the right answer. That is, Kumar, is it possible that an economy have no capital stock? Well, theoretically, it is possible, but in practical purposes, it is not possible. So we are looking at theory part. That is why theoretically it is possible that if there is no capital stock, then the depreciation will be zero. But practically, as we have seen, there is a presence of capital stock. Understood the difference that I am telling you? Adarsh, Rahmatullah, Kumar, you all are right. This option D here is the right answer. Kumar, yes, sir. Now, I told you, right, from gross to net, what we do is we minus depreciation. Whereas from gross domestic product to gross national product, we add net factor income abroad. Now, there is one thing that I'm missing out. For example, an Indian citizen, if he or she is sending money who is working in Saudi Arabia to their parents located in India or in the state of Kerala, so will that remittances will be added to GNP or NFIA? Yes. Understood? So any income which Indians are sending from abroad, it will not be included in GDP, but it will be included in NFIA or in calculation of GNP. Understood? Now coming to this net national product, I told you, right? From gross national product to net national product, what we do? N here is same, but we have to change here from G to N, that is gross to net. How do we get from gross to net? That net national product which is attained by gross national product, and we have to minus the depreciation. Understood? So this is what net national product is, but you have to understand this net national product is a net national product at market prices. But what if we have to calculate factor cost or net national product at factor cost? So what we do here, can anyone recall the previous lecture that I've told you? The difference between factor cost, basic prices and market prices? Now to calculate net national product at factor cost, what we do is NNP at factor cost. What we do is we take off NNP at market prices. And what did we do in calculating factor cost to market prices? We added tax. So we remove tax here and we add subsidy here, right? So these two were have to be added here if we were to get NNP at market price. So this is reduced here if we are to calculate NNP at factor cost. And why we calculate NNP at factor cost? Because it determines the national income of economy. So market price, that it includes direct taxes which is accrued to the government. Therefore, we have to deduct them from net national product which is evaluated in market price. Similarly, the subsidies which are granted by the government on prices of some commodities, we need to add subsidies. Therefore, net national product at factor cost, it is the difference of net national product at market prices with the taxes and subsidies. Understood? And this is what is known as national income of the economy. Please remember that. Now let us solve this question. National income is which? Answer this quickly. Kumar, Ahmedullah, Adarsh, Priyanka, B. Yes. National income is what? Net national product at factor cost, which we get. How do we get net national product at factor cost? We take NNP at market price and we reduce taxes and we add subsidies to it. Therefore, we get the NNP at factor cost, which is also the national income of any country. Yes, all of you are right. Now, there is another factor which we estimate. It is known as personal income. Now, what is personal income? That is individuals in a country when they get money. Now, individuals in a country when they get payment and before they make direct taxes or they pay government the taxes, what is known as personal income. Now, this personal income is of an individual in nature. So, to come or to arrive at personal income from national income, what we do is that we deduct undistributed corporate profits or employee contributions to social security schemes that the employees themselves make or the corporates themselves make to add, and we add transfer payments like gifts and scholarships, right? So we do all this in order to get personal income from the national income. So personal income from national income is that when we minus undistributed corporate profits, we minus the social security contributions of the employees, and we add the transfer payments, then what we get is the personal income which we have to do from national income, right? And this is the amount of money that the households have with themselves. But is it the money that the households will be able to spend? The answer is no. Because I told you, right, this is before the payment of direct taxes that the households have made. So the money that the households will eventually have is not personal income, rather what it is called as personal disposable income. But before that, let us understand what is added or what is excluded from personal income. Will salaries received by an Indian resident in US added to personal income? The answer is yes, as it was a part of national income. Do scholarships received from Government of India added to personal income? The answer is yes, as it was a part of transfer payments which we add to national income in order to get personal income. Salaries paid to non-residents, is it added to national income or personal income? The answer is no, because non-residents we have to deduct it if we were to arrive at national income and we use national income. Therefore, salaries of non-residences, these are not added into personal income. Earnings of Tata Motors, which is a corporate, I told you, undistributed corporate profits will have to be deducted here. Therefore, earnings of any Indian company, Tata Motors, Infosys, TCS, Tata Steel, Reliance, Jio, etc., have to be reduced from it. And the interest paid on loans by households, what do? These have to be minus and not included into the personal income, because this is money that is paid by the personal income, and therefore the houses, they do not have the amount of money that they are paying as a form of interest. Understood? Is there any doubt in personal income? Now I told you, right, personal income is an income before the households they use it to pay taxes. So if we reduce the amount of taxes and fines that households make, what we get is the disposable personal income. That is, if we reduce taxes and fines from personal income, we get what is a disposable personal income, and this is the amount of money that the households will have with themselves so that they can spend on buying any goods and services. So any tax that the household pay, income tax, property tax, professional tax, they will have to be reduced, and this is the amount available to households for their own consumption. Is that the money that they can spend or save? Understood what is disposable personal income? Now, what is meant by disposable personal income? Is it a person's income? Is it the income remaining out of personal income after payment of tax, or remaining after basic necessities, or income spent for the food only? It is personal income. It is disposable personal income. So, option B here is the right answer. Rahmatullah B. I don't know if you're answering for this question. Now, this screenshot I've taken from NCRT. This is the best screenshot about all the items that we have understood right now. So the maximum amount, first of all, we calculated GDP, right? Now, if we add net factor income of from abroad to GDP, what we get is gross national product. Now, to come at net national product, we understood from G to N, we have to minus the depreciation to it. So if we add net national product and depreciation, what we get is gross national product. Now, if we were to calculate the national income, what we do is we minus the indirect taxes and subsidies, that is net national product and factor cost, which is also the national income. Understood? But what if we were to calculate personal income? We minus undistributed profit of households, net interest payments by household, we minus it. We minus corporate taxes that the taxes corporate pay, and we add the transfer income to it. Therefore, what we get is personal income from the national income. And if we were to calculate personal disposable income, what we do is from personal income we minus tax payment and non-tax payment like fines, then we get personal disposable income, right? So I hope this table or flowchart is making everything clear to you. This I found in NCRT, and this is the best representation of all the items that we have heard, as it helps us quickly revise everything. Understood? Now, what is national disposable income? Now, the amount of money that any nation has which it can spend or save, that is known as national disposable income. Now, it is a sum of factor and non-factor incomes which accrues to residents, whether an Indian resident living in India or abroad, all of their items or incomes we add, that is called as national disposable income, and it gives us the idea of what is the maximum amount of goods and services that the economy has at its disposal. So this is very different from national personal income, as it adds everything: corporate profits, income of Indian living abroad, etc., etc. Now, per capita income, what is per capita income? If you divide GDP with the amount of population, we get GDP per capita. Similarly, if we divide national income with India's population, what we get is India's per capita income. So it is average income of person that a country earns every year, and it is income per head of the population. It is calculated as a measure of all sources of income in aggregate, such as GDP, GNI, etc. So if we divide any of these figures by population, we get per capita. So per capita income, as I told you, it is the national income. When you divide it with population, we get what is called as per capita income, and it tells us how much average amount of money each and every citizen of India has. So national income at constant price is divided from total population of the country. It is known as what? Can you answer me? Pay close attention to the keyword here, constant price. Anyone else? Kumar has said option A. Anyone else? Priyanka, Rahmatullah, Adarsh, Surjit, I guess, has left. Priyanka says A. Anyone else? Kapil Khanna, new entrance. Option B, right? Kapil is right. Option B is right. Because I told you, right? National income at constant prices. And what do we get at constant prices? Real GDP. What do we get at current prices? Nominal GDP. So if we divide national income at constant prices with total population, we get real per capita income. Whereas just per capita income is called as nominal per capita income, which we get at current prices, not constant prices. So Priyanka and Kumar, it is not A, rather B. I hope you remember this, because it is our mistakes only that helps us keep remembering stuff, because we remember what kind of mistakes we did. So please remember this. Now the growth rate of per capita income at current prices is higher than per capita income at constant prices, because the latter, it takes into account the rate of what? I hope you'll mark this answer clear. It is very easy. Anyone? Yes, Rahmatullah is right, because the per capita income at constant prices, it takes into account changes in price level or inflation. Therefore, option C is the right answer. Now I told you, right, GDP calculation, it was revised back in 2015, and the base year, it was revised from 2004 to 2005 to 2011-12, and the methodological change was changed. As I told you earlier, we used to calculate GDP at factor cost. Now we calculate what? GVA at basic prices and GDP at market prices. Now you must be confused. What is GDP and GVA? Don't worry, I'll tell you abhi thodi der baad. Now, sector-wise estimates. The sector-wise estimates was made possible only because we started estimating gross value added, because gross value added helps us understand the sector-wise changes in India. And by undertaking or use of corporate data, which is sourced from MCA portal of MCA 21 portal of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, we are able to estimate the exact amount of corporate data. And sectoral upgrade also took place because India saw inclusion of newer sectors, telecom, real estate, banking, as these sectors were developed. So we have to estimate the changes in these sectors so as to calculate the exact GDP in India. Now, for example, the amount of items which is considered for GDP also changes. For example, India used pen drive back in 2004 and 5. India used CDs, but the use of CDs, it reduced drastically in 2011-12, right? So this highlights the changes in manufacturing sector wise, which we have to take into account if we were to measure accurately the GDP figures in any country. Now, What is GDP and GVA? There are differences in GDP and GVA because GVA is determined at basic prices, whereas in terms of market prices, we use GDP at market prices. So therefore, you have to understand GDP and GVA, although they appear same, but they are very different. What is the difference between GDP and GVA? Because GDP, it estimates the presence or state of economy's health from consumer side. Therefore, it is determining economy's health and it fairly estimates the people's standard of life, because the GDP, it highlights the total amount of goods and services produced, and we divide it by population. We get per capita income, which highlights that what are the standards of life that the average Indian citizens has. But on the GVA, it is just sum total of value addition that is happening in every sector. So this GVA, it determines the state of economy from producers side, because it is producers who are adding value to their goods, right? So therefore, this rather is not a true state of economy's health, but rather it is a true state of economic activity that is going on in the country. For example, if there is less value addition in agricultural sector, or if it is there is more value addition in service sector, we'll estimate that agricultural sector is not doing well, whereas service sector is doing very well. And this is possible only through the use of GVA in the calculation of GDP. Also, it helps us break down these industry wise or region wise and sector wise contribution. Therefore, GVA is a better indication of the sectors of economy, whereas the entire nation's economy is concerned, here the GDP is a better indicator because it assesses the changes in economy from the consumer side. So let us understand the very basic difference between GVA and GDP. The focus here is on economic health, whereas the focus of GVA is on sectoral health. The uses of GDP is on inter-country comparison, whereas the uses of GDP is sectoral contribution, right? That we can assess the contribution of agricultural sector with that of manufacturing sector, service sector, right? The calculation of GDP is done at market price, that we add taxes and we minus subsidies, whereas you understand GVA does not include taxes. So we get the actual idea of what is happening in the industry. Whereas the policy implications is that GDP, by understanding GDP, government understands whether there is slowdown in the economy and it changes its policy accordingly, or whether the economy is growing fast, then it changes its policy accordingly. Whereas in cases of GVA, the policy implications is that whether any sector needs government help or not. So, for example, agricultural sector is witnessing slowdown, the government in its next budget will make more provisions for the agricultural sector, right? So this is how the sectoral contributions or sectoral contributions to GVA helps us understand the various sectors of Indian economy, whereas GDP overall is the larger picture which helps us understand the overall nation's economic health, right? So this is a macro indicator, MVA or GVA is a micro indicator. Understood the difference? Now value added means value of what? The option is D, because goods and services, less of production of intermediate goods and services is what the purpose of value added means. Now GDP growth rate and economic cycle, they go through various cycles. For example, India's GDP does not grow like this, rather we go on an average like this. Some of our examples of peak, that is the economy is at highest scale and after that it reduces, and this is known as trough. Whereas this process is known as expansion, this is known as contraction. So expansion is increase in GDP or increase in growth rate. Peak is the highest point of the growth of economy. Recession is actually 2 subsequent quarters when there is a negative growth rate in an economy. Then if there is a negative growth rate in 2 subsequent quarters, it is known as a period of recession. Trough, you understand, is the bottom half of the economy, and after that there is an expansion or recovery that is happening. Now recovery is also different types. It is known as K-shaped recovery. If after the economy has fell, some sectors increase whereas some sectors remain stagnant, that is called as a K-shaped recovery. You can see the difference, K here. Whereas if the economy is falling here, and if it witness an uptick, it is known as V-shaped recovery, right? So this is the difference in K-shaped recovery. Some sectors of the economy is recovering whereas other sectors are stagnant. Whereas V sector, the entire economy is recovering rapidly, that is called as V recovery. Now, is GDP equal to welfare? If we can say that India's growth is happening or India's GDP is increasing, can we able to say that India is also getting much more better as a whole country, or India is seeing welfare in its the living standards of its citizen? The answer is no, because welfare, it is a greater concept than growth. Growth rather is a mathematical concept or an absolute amount of growth that is happening in the country. But what if the fruits of growth is just cornered by rich people, and if it is not going to benefit the poor people in India, then we cannot say that welfare is actually happening despite India's GDP is growing, because there are some limitations into India's GDP growth. First is that there is an no uniform distribution that is happening in cases of GDP, and there is a chance that rich people, they might be profiting, whereas poor people, their wages or their income is not increasing. So in that case, we cannot say that GDP leads to welfare. Also, there are non-monetary exchanges that are happening in the economy. For example, your mother living in the household, she might be cooking for you, she might be doing all kind of household chores, but are you paying your mother any kind of income? The answer is no. And therefore, even your mother is doing significant work at your home, which otherwise you would have to require money to spend if some other person is working instead of her. It does not include these non-monetary exchanges. Also, any damage to India's environment, pollution, etc., these are not taken care of by GDP, because we understand if factories, they are producing items, there is a fair bit of amount of chance that that factory might also be leading or disposing of pollutants into the river water bodies, right? So GDP does not take into account the problems of pollution that are examples of externalities. Now, in terms of contribution, there are unequal contribution made by different kind of services. For example, if government is spending its item on defense services, it is not making an economic contribution in India. Rather, government is spending money on defense. Whereas if government or any item is spending manufacturing of or construction of bridges, it leads to higher contribution to economy, which can further promote growth in future times. And hence, this contribution, although equal amount of money might be spent on defense and bridges, however, the contribution of these items into economy is different. Understood? And GDP does not take into account the unequal contribution. However, if we can say, if India is undertaking better expenditure in defenses, entire India will be protected, and a safer India will lead to a higher economic growth in the future. Understood? And what about negative contribution? Because items like tobacco, alcohol, they might be produced in economy, and it leads to increase in GDP if they are produced in economy, but consumption of these items eventually puts lives in dangers, right? So this is how even GDP increase can lead to negative welfare in people, because GDP does not take into account these kind of factors. Understood? Now, which of the following statement is or are correct with the measurement of GDP? It fails to take into account income inequality in society. Yes. Non-market transactions are excluded in measurement of GDP, like your mother undertaking various household work. She might be caring of a baby in the household. She might be caring of your grandparents in the household, for which she's not provided with any money, and hence her contribution in households is neglected in GDP. Therefore, both statements are right. Option C here is the right answer. Now, there are other factors which can be used in estimating the welfare of the economy. If not foolproof, they are better indicators in understanding welfare. First is green GDP. As this green GDP, it accounts for environmental consequences of country's traditional GDP. It is an indicator of, by undertaking the factors of environmental degradation. And if we minus them with GDP, what we get is green GDP. So, Let us try to see this question. Depreciation of an economy is currently accounted for in GDP product. Is depreciation accounted for in GDP? Anyone, if you can answer it? Depreciation, it is not taken into account in GDP, rather it is net domestic product which takes into account of GDP. Therefore, first statement is incorrect. Green GDP accounts for environmental degradation due to economic progression of a country. Yes, it is right. Therefore, if you want to take into account environmental degradation, GDP is not a great account, rather green GDP is what you have to look out for. Therefore, option B here is right, because only B here is the right answer. Now, there is another concept of estimating not growth or domestic product, rather happiness in the country, and that is known as Gross National Happiness Index. This was actually introduced by Bhutan as an alternative to GDP, because you understand Bhutan is not a great as far as economic growth is concerned. So they've actually tried to measure economic and moral progress of the country, and for that they are using 33 indicators spread in 9 different domains, be it psychological well-being, health, education, cultural diversity, good governance, etc. You do not have to remember all of these 9. What you have to understand that these are non-economic aspects that are taken into account in estimating the happiness index of any country. Understood? So these are alternatives for GDP. Another one is called as Human Development Index, which was an index published by the United Nations Development Program through its Human Development Report in here. Now it gives equal weightage to 3 different items, and it considers the score of the country based from 0 to 1. So higher is the value of HDR or HDI, the better the country is as far as development is concerned. But you have to understand this Human Development Index, it does not take into account gender inequality, poverty, and environmental degradation, and it takes into account different items like life expectancy at birth, mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling, both have equal weightage in education. Health is estimated by life expectation at work, and living standard, it is estimated by gross national income per capita. And these 3 items, health, education, and living standards, they have equal weightage, and it is used to calculate the Human Development Index. Now, which of the following indicators is not used to calculate Human Development Index? It is gender inequality, as I've told you right now, as life expectancy, expectation, education, and per capita income is used. And now let us solve the last question. Which of the following dimension of human development is not a dimension in Human Development Index? Anyone can tell me the right answer to this question? Kumar, Rahmatullah, Kapil, Priyanka, Adarsh, anyone? Last question of the day, C. Adarsh says C. Anyone else? No, knowledge is actually taken into account through education. Long and healthy life is an healthcare indicator. Decent standard of living is estimated by GNI per capita. Access to banking and other financial provisions are not used in calculation of HDI, as you can see here. So this was all for today's class. Now what you are expected to do is take rest now, have dinner, go to sleep, get up early in the morning, revise the notes which will be provided to you in the portal itself, that is this slide, and attempt the test that goes live by StudyIQ. All right. So I'll see you again on Monday with lecture on money and banking. Until then, please have a great weekend. Revise, and give test, which is very important. Okay. So I wish you all a very good night. Have a great weekend.